Are in the house from Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95. The big station on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from, understanding our past, embracing our present, charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty, embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q, networking Dominica with the rest of the world. The experts are in the house from Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.
Good evening. Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to you in Radio Land at home and abroad. This is the Global View on Q. I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, it's the 17th day of May 2022, and it is just about 7:40 in the studios at Q95, the big station. It's the 17th Tuesday as well of 2022, and my very, very distinguished guest tonight, Dr. Irving Andre, retired Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector David Michaels, Dr. David Michaels, sociologist Mr. Simeon Joseph, who should be joining us shortly. Of course, we also have peaceologist Dr. Peter St. Jean. Tonight, we will be exploring solutions for rising crime, violence, homicides in Dominica and the Caribbean. So please stay with us and put your ideas in the mix. You don't want to miss this dialogue tonight. So here are a few questions that I wanted to just put on the table as I put out a few talking points. So what are the reasons for this spate of crime? Is it social conflict or social deviance? Is it unemployment perhaps? Or is it the drug trade maybe? Or is it pervasive immorality from top to bottom? Is it due to uneven or inconsistent policing, or the gangster lifestyle that has exerted a great influence on Dominican youth? The result of all of this, of course, is the cheapening of human life and the glorification of violence. So what are the causes of this scourge? How should individuals and communities and our criminal justice services respond to crime in Dominica and the wider Caribbean, and especially the recent spate of violent crimes? What can we all contribute towards this crime prevention, crime reduction, and supporting our criminal justice system or services to bring offenders to justice? Are there special measures required to divert our adults and young people from crime? It is a real problem, isn't it? So let's talk about it. And let's do this with no anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness. As usual, just looking to bring back civility, a caring society, good governance, peace, and love among Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. So wherever you are, in Dominica, in the region, and globally, please join this conversation with Dr. Irving Andre, a retired Scotland Yard Detective Chief Inspector David Michael, sociologist Simeon Joseph, peaceologist Dr. Peter St. Jean. Just want to shout out all the guys and hope all the guys doing very well. It's all happening on the Global View on You tonight. So we're live on Q95, and we're also live on YouTube and Facebook at Q95 FM Radio and YSQ FM. So please share the live. We salute you, all of you, on the online streaming platforms. Please invite your friends to join the Q family and get the latest breaking local, regional, and international news and happenings. This is where you get it, on the big station. So tonight, the voices of Dominican listeners, your voices, friends of Dominica, at home and abroad, will be heard. And what you see is, well, certainly we hope you will tell us what you see as your own solutions to fix these issues, these challenges, these concerns facing Dominica and the Caribbean. Lambi is on the console and Sherwin is keeping us on the air. Lambi will take your calls and direct them to us a little later in the program. Certainly want to hear from you. But as we get things going, I just wanted to give a huge shout out, some hugs and much love and appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers as usual and frontline workers. We know they're doing their best to keep us safe from this deadly coronavirus and its new variants. We know there's a new surge that seems to be rearing its head again. We hope it doesn't really get going. But we know that they're working very often under very difficult conditions, so please follow the correct advice, the guidelines and protocols. Play safe, stay alive. So happy as always to have you with us, and tonight is no exception. So we welcome you warmly, and we embrace you, and wherever you are, in every community in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Okay, so let's get started. I thought we really want to get started tonight. I go first to Dr. Irving, but I also have to let you know that some of the other folks who are with us, like Dr. Michael and Peter Saint, Dr. Peter Saint, and Simon Joseph, we will introduce them a little bit later. As, you know, Dr. Andre is going to get us going, but certainly they are no stranger to you, our listeners, our Q family. You heard them before, and I know that you have the utmost confidence that they will provide substance and meaning to this discussion tonight. So, Dr. Andre, could we, as always, I yield to you to get the conversation on this crime business. Over to you, Dr. Andre. You might want to unmute your mic.
Let me say good evening to your listeners and to this esteemed panel. Let me say good evening to Dr. Sejan. It's always good to see you, sir. And I commend you for the great work you're doing in the university in Chicago. As usual, Mr. Joseph is not here as yet, apparently. Mr. Gregoire, of course, you are doing human service to the cause of righteousness and democracy in Dominica. And Lambi, the prophet who is always at the mics, leading and directing the show. And obviously, good evening to your listeners. It's a very interesting topic, quite frankly. You will certainly benefit from the wisdom of Dr. Sejar and also Mr. Simeon Joseph with respect to the sociological explanations of the genesis of crime. You will also benefit from what Dr. Sejar has to say about the phenomenon which he refers to as peaceology. I will take the lead in trying to share with you my 2 cents worth of, it would be presumptuous to describe it as wisdom, but suffice it to say, it has been gained for a number of decades, toiling in the courts, the criminal courts, in the jurisdiction where I now preside. Now, every panelist will tell you at some point that there is no single cause to explain the genesis of this spate of criminal activity, particularly this spate of murder. In fact, we can describe it as the result of a causal soup. And in that causal soup, you will find ingredients of unemployment. You will find ingredients of perhaps ineffective policing. You will find ingredients about the negative influences that impact adversely on Dominica's youth. You will find ingredients, not so much ingredients, but shots of Hennessy, marking a certain type of lifestyle. You will find a type of attitude, the glorification of a number of negative attributes, attributes relating to, for example, materialism, a glorification of victimization, a glorification of, to some degree, fraudulent acquisition, a glorification of selective persecution or prosecution conducted by the state. and you will find all these ingredients into this causal soup that explains why we're here today in terms of violent crime. We can say that oftentimes, in terms of criminal justice or the investigation of criminal charges, what is often focused on are what we can describe as the low-lying fruit, the usual suspects, typically the impoverished offenders, which unfortunately is not necessarily consistent with solving criminal activity, because you are dealing with those who, quite frankly, are set up to do the street crime, those which will be the focus of law enforcement agents, while those persons who are in the hierarchy of crime escape literally scot-free. One of the things that we have to look at in terms of violent crime in Dominica is certainly the drug trade. And if we are serious about trying to find solutions for that phenomenon, we must ask, well, who are the overseers in the drug trade? Who are the overseers responsible for bringing in significant quantities of drugs in the community? Because if we are to try to solve some of these issues, if we accept the fact that much or a lot or a significant degree of the crime that we're experiencing today is the end result of the drug trade, and Dominica would not be unusual with respect to that situation. It's all over the Eastern Caribbean. Some of the Eastern Caribbeans are known as sources of drugs in terms of the export of drugs and so on. Fortunately, Dominica is not on that list. Well, at least insofar as the international community is concerned. But if you speak to a law enforcement agent in Guadeloupe, in Martinique, in Antigua, they may tell you a different story, that Dominicans disproportionately are involved in the drug trade. So the question is, to the extent that we are serious about addressing the root causes, we have to somehow focus on those responsible for being the overseers of that trade. Not only that, but we have to pay close attention to the manner in which offenders are policed in Dominica. And I suspect Dr. Peter Saint-Germain will tell us something about this. In terms of law enforcement, is it a reactive attitude that you have in terms of law enforcement? Or do you have a proactive attitude? Have you drawn up strategies to identify those persons or those communities which are vulnerable to this type of activity? Have you focused your policing resources on those activities? Or instead, have you focused on those activities which reflect the efforts of citizens to exercise their rights under the Constitution? Have you merely focused on the usual suspects? Have you focused, for example, on a blind prophet who leads a march every Wednesday on the sidewalks? Irrespective of the verse in the Bible, Jeremiah chapter 13, verse 6, which says, and help me, you can go proclaim all my words in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. You aim to focus much of your resources on persons who are engaged in peaceful protest, while in Dominica, where everyone knows everyone is business, you have the strange phenomenon of crimes which are unsolved. That itself is a contradiction in terms. It is an indictment of the system of law enforcement that in Dominica, of all places, there are unsolved crimes, given the size of the community, given the fact that everyone, as I said, knows everybody's business, even yours, Mr. G. So that itself raises some serious questions as to whether or not we are serious in dealing with these types of crimes. What type of sentences are imposed on persons involved in the upper echelons of the drug importing hierarchy? What type of penalties, if any, are imposed on those persons involved in human trafficking? What type of penalties, if any, are those involved in money laundering? What type of penalties are those involved in the consistent and persistent violation of Dominica's criminal laws, as opposed to those low-lying fruit who was involved in simple drug trafficking and who have bought into this culture of the glorification of materialism, the glorification of a certain type of lifestyle, the drinks of choice, Hennessy, the glorification of a certain type of lifestyle evidenced by what is seen on social media. I just finished a case of first-degree murder where the victim was targeted because on social media he was showing wads of cash he had made through drug trafficking, and he became the target. And ultimately that led to his death. But what are we doing to deal with those issues? What messages are we sending in terms of the values that we have espoused? Is this spate of murders the fruit of the loom? Is it the fruits of the forbidden tree? Are we reaping what we have sown? These are fundamental questions which we cannot ignore. Because if there's a perception that you can get away with whatever you do, you can kill somebody, whether as an act of revenge or an act to gain respect in your certain type of group, and that there is a significant chance that you will not face prosecution. There is a significant chance that with the passage of time, the charge will go away. There's a significant chance that because you may be the little snipers or whoever, or Navy SEALs, what you've done will be overlooked. If there is that perception, then how can you talk about solving crime? In fact, what is happening or what has happened is a perpetuation of that type of behavior. But the society has to take a responsibility also. Dr. Sejan will tell you that the phenomenon is not too different in the United States. Because if you, the stakeholders in the society, think that Gaston, it's not my business, let them kill themselves in their own neighborhoods, because rest assured, they're killing us in our little white fenced neighborhoods. They're killing their own brothers. As long as that type of activity is confined to little distinguished and compartmentalized and siloized, if that's a word, neighborhoods throughout Dominica, invariably impoverished, then why should we care? Why should we not continue just going to church, saying 112 novenas, saying making the sign of the cross 25 times, while turning a blind eye to that contagion that is slowly poisoning and that is slowly depriving Dominica of every breath of air that it breathes on a daily basis? So this is a societal thing. Crime is not, quite frankly, the responsibility of the justice system. Crime is the responsibility of all those stakeholders who in some way or the other are complicit in the perpetuation of crime. And Mr. Gregoire, in your opening piece, you talk about the immorality from top to bottom. Children, we were told, live what they learn. They live what they see. If they see instances where crime, we were taught growing up, crime doesn't pay. But if what they're seeing is the very contrary, crime does pay, then why do you think they will not try to emulate what they're seeing from those who are in a position of authority, from those who are in a position of governance? What makes you think that they will not manifest the same type of attitude? And that is where we are now. It's an attitudinal thing to a significant degree. And as I said, no one cause will explain the genesis or the persistence of this type of activity. But these are factors we ignore at our peril, because we will pay the price. And oftentimes it is only when the wrong person, unfortunately, is the victim of that type of activity, then you have a hue and a cry among the stakeholders in the community. And then you have this anguish, what have we become? Well, we have become what we have become because of our complacency, because of our conspiracy, and because of our complicity in what is happening today in Dominica. And no solution can be effective if it doesn't fail to address these fundamental societal causes. But this is my opening salvo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. Thank you so much for that. Deep words indeed. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say about that as we go along. But I don't know whether, I know that we were having some difficulties with some technical difficulties with Dr. David Michael. I don't know whether we have him on the line. I asked my technician to try to get him on the telephone. So we don't have him on the line yet, but we will try to get him. I just want to acknowledge the presence among us here now of Simeon Joseph. Simeon, I'm happy you could make the time to be with us tonight. We know you have a very busy schedule, but I wanted to go over to Dr. Peter Saint-Jean now, because I know that a little later on, Dr. Saint-Jean is incidentally a student again. He's back in class. So he's in fact having a class tonight. So he's going to have to cut away from us for a little while, a little later on in the program, and then come back to us. And I believe Dr. Saint-Jean may in fact have a colleague, a psychiatrist, I think was a psychologist, psychologist who may be with him, who might want to say a few words to us tonight, or a different perspective. So Dr. Saint-Jean, I wanted to give you a chance to make your opening remarks and say a few things if you'd like to get going, so that by the time you cut away, we would not have missed too much. And so when you come back, you can make a further contribution again.
Yes, the class is supposed to begin in a minute, but my professor is not yet in the room, so I will take the liberty to make the brief introduction. Kudos to everything that Dr. Andre has said. And I just want to say that
somebody's mic is open.
You know what?
Maybe not. It's probably not yours. So go ahead. Go right ahead.
Yes. So I Mr. G, I guess you may have to dribble the ball for a minute. Let me get out of the room because class is about to begin. I'm gonna have to go out in the hallway. Maybe I can just walk myself outside. If I can just do that, I'm sure it's not going to be too much of a problem. So basically what I was saying is that I agree with what Dr. Andre has said. And the bottom line is that, crime, there is no one explanation for crime, because crime is actually socially constructed. Crime is an act that is the violation of the criminal statutes of the jurisdiction where the act occurred. So the most important thing for a crime to occur is that there has to be a law, that not just a law that forbids it, but a criminal statute that forbids that action, right? So if something is either not in the codes or not recognized as wrong, as morally wrong as it might be, it is not a crime, right? And we know that there are differential enforcements of crime. We know there are differential prosecutions of crime. There are different punishments of crime. So that's important to take into context, right? That there is no one explanation for crime. So if there is no one explanation of crime, but there is one general definition, acts that violate the criminal statutes of the jurisdiction where the crime occurred, there are also different categories of crime. You have violent crimes, you have property crimes, you have quality of life crimes, you have corporate crimes, you have white collar crimes, you have underground economy crimes, and so on, right? Crimes of public order. So when we talk about violent crimes, the motivation of the violent crimes, crimes that are against people, crimes, not just violence from physical violence, it could be financial violence. We have different types of economic violence. We have environmental violence. We have a lot of different types of violence, right? So but typically we refer to violent crimes as crimes against people. Crimes like robbery, crimes, and those types of crime, battery, and those types of crimes. We have also property crimes, and violent crimes are oftentimes explained by people trying to resolve unresolved conflicts, or using means or certain means to resolve unresolved conflicts, or to inflict hurt and harm against other people. So that's one type of motivation as to why people act that way. We also have property crimes. We have burglaries, we have thefts, we have vandalism, And these are crimes against people's property, cars, car theft, and so on. That's a different structure of motivation. Why would someone want to burn your house? Or why would someone want to break your fence and those types of things, right? And of course, in the violent crimes, you have murders, the ones that we're talking about, and so on. You have corporate crimes, right? Those crimes that people use legitimate office to do illegitimate activities, right? And we have other types of illicit types of crimes that occur, and we have public order crimes such as prostitution, jaywalking, and those types of things. So it is important that when we talk about crime, we understand and we remember that there are different types of crimes and there are different causal factors associated with those types of crimes. Now, we my friend Simeon Joseph, I understood is carrying tonight the banner of sociology. So I am here tonight as a peaceologist, and I will explain what that means, because I believe we need a new paradigm. We need a paradigm upgrade because of all of what we know. These problems of crime and violence continue to persist, which tells me that there's a lot more we have to understand. And I define peace, so that's part of why peaceology has been formulated. Peaceology, I refer to, there have been different definitions, which is the idea of making peace profitable, the science and practice of making peace profitable. But in its most recent renditions and my most recent publications, I've been referring to peaceology as the science and practice of optimum quality of life. The theory of peaceology assumes that every reasonable human being strives to optimize the quality of life, meaning to live the best life they have possible. And when people believe that there are too many challenges or there infringes on people's ability to live quality of life, to optimize the quality of life, crime, violence, delinquency, those types of negative quality of life outcomes are directly associated with inabilities of people to realize optimum quality of life, right? So we can talk about what that means for the shooting that we saw in Buffalo. This white man that shot up this place and selectively chose black people in this relatively deprived community to shoot right 2 minutes down the street from one of my dwellings in Buffalo, the one in Buffalo, New York. Whenever we see the shootings that we see, one man got shot and then soon after somebody else got shot, Bafa State, Yampies, we see the different retaliatory crimes. All of what we talk about have to generally fit in the framework, but has to be able to have different types of explanations and motivation. In peaceology, I developed peaceology because I believe sociology, political science, criminology, all of the ologies that we have great values, but we need more help. So in talking about peaceology as the science and practice of optimizing quality of life, one of the things that I say is one of the things we have not placed enough focus on is how the ability of people to optimize the quality of life, to live their best life possible, result in negative outcomes such as crime, violence, delinquency, and so on. So the issue is that how do we recognize what is the optimum quality of life that we can live and what type of avenues are going to be created for people to live the best lives possible. And when people's ability to live the best life possible seem to be infringed, whether it's by themselves or by the family members or by the state or so on, what are the kinds of consequences that could occur and how do we as citizens respond in that regard? So while sociology and criminology will ask questions, why is there so much violence? And we'll try to focus on finding the problem and shooting the problem. We can't outshoot the problem. We can't outmoney the problem. We can't outpray the problem. But while the paradigms are about finding problems and basically destroying the things that cause the problem, peaceology is built on a different type of platform. The point of departure for criminology and sociology, for example, will say, why is there so much violence? But the point of departure for peaceology, we will say, in spite of what we know about why there is so much violence, and all those things may be true, the question is, why isn't there even more violence? And when we ask the question, why isn't there even more violence, we get to understand some things that we may have never thought about before. Because even in the midst of all of these people that are doing so bad in those circumstances, there are going to be people who are not doing so bad. We also know that there's an African proverb that tells us that when we know better, we do better. But in many circumstances, we know better, but we seem to be doing worse. So how is it that we understand the connection between knowledge and results? we have to really look at this issue of the gap that exists between intent and impact. So the impact that happens in the world, what are the intents that are connected to them, right? So in peaceology, we talk about intents and impacts. We look at the fact, asking the question, why aren't things worse? And we say that a major solution to violence is to make peace profitable. So part of what I'm doing is I'm building an economy of peace. And some of you are familiar with the small piece of land of 18 acres, 17.998 acres in Trafalgar, dubbed the Peaceology Acres, where the world headquarters for Peaceology is actually being built in motion. So I just wanted to add quickly as I wind up with this, that the contribution I want to make tonight is to say that all of what my colleagues are going to tell you are going to be true in reference to this, but we need more help. And that is why a new paradigm of peaceology is being developed right here. And the reason why I'm currently in graduate school is that I have a PhD in sociology, I have a master's in criminology. Those things are enough, but it doesn't teach me much about the science of healing. And that's why I'm doing a clinical mental health degree right now. And I hope to be doing an MBA next year, begin like MBA later on, which will help me understand the business, because crime is profitable, but peace is even more profitable. Crime pays, but peace pays more. So we want to create industry around crime, around peace, the same way that there's industry around violence. So I would just say lastly, as I go, and I know there'll be some discussions, I would really like to challenge us to think about some sort of action plan that we can be involved in to help with those conditions that we talk about all the time. Instead of just updating the world on our suffering, is there something, Mr. G, Dr. Andre, Mr. Simeon Joseph, Mr. David Michael, that can be done, that we can be involved in to help as part of the solution in the process? And I will stay for another minute or so. My professor just walked in. I will stay for another minute or so, and then hopefully Dr. Fletcher, who is the brother of Colin Fletcher, who was a West Indian cricket player from Jamaica, and who himself, a very brilliant professor, I'm glad to say, is the first black professor that I've had in graduate school. Of all the graduate schools that I've had, and I can't be more proud to be sitting in the classroom with a black man as my professor that is so well-versed, well-educated, well-balanced, and gives us pride as a Caribbean man as well. So hopefully you guys get to meet Dr. Fletcher later on. But thank you, Mr. G. Thank you all panelists and listeners for allowing me to make these introductory comments. I'll listen a little bit before I head in.
Yeah, and thanks a lot, Peter. Appreciate that. And I know you'll be with us later on. And so we'll be looking forward to that. But I just wanted to, I think we found a way to get Dr. David Michael on the line with us. So I'm going to introduce him now. I don't know how long his technology will hold, but Sheridan has found a way. So let me just ask, Dr. David Michaels, are you with us? I'm not hearing him yet, so I'm not sure that he's hearing us. Peter, you may have to turn off your mic, or somebody. Oh yeah, Peter's mic is off. I mean, Dr. Michael, are you with us? Lambi, is Dr. Michael on with us?
Yes, I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Your audio is a bit low. If you can speak up a little louder, we might be able to hear you a little better. And we are getting a little feedback. I'm not sure if it's from your mic or your phone or from what.
Can you hear me?
So if you need a minute to fix him up a little better, I can move on and give you a chance to sort it out. Unless, of course, he can come through now and we can hear him. Lambi, should we go on or should we wait?
Go ahead, David.
Yes, are you able to hear me now?
Hearing you very well now, very, very well. David, I just wanted to, as you come in, I just wanted to make sure that I introduced you.
Can you hear me now?
I'm hearing you very well indeed. Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you.
Okay. Yes, can you hear me now, please?
Yes.
Yes, we're hearing you very well.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, and good evening, everyone. The first thing I would like to say at the beginning is if we're looking for solutions on violent crime and other criminal activity, our panel tonight has esteemed as we are, I think it's regrettable that it's a mainly, if not all, male panel, because females form half of our society in Dominica and across CARICOM. So we need, if we're going to be getting solutions, we need the whole population on board. Sheridan, the next one you organised, please can we have representation from across the population? In terms of some of the cases which has brought us here to this evening, which are very disturbing and they do have an impact on the communities where they happen and society in Dominica and around CARICOM more widely. And while some people respond when we have a sensational situation, I think the roots of crime and violence start much earlier. And I think, as the last speaker was saying, we want to respond to the situation rather than responding much earlier in terms of prevention and diversion, whether it's adult or young people involved. So, for example, it is still fairly common in Dominica for parents and guardians and carers to beat children and young people. So children and young people, if all they can see around them, if all they can feel as a child is violence, that is going to be instilled in them that the way to respond in life is violence, and those who get involved in criminal activity will graduate to violent crime. So it needs much soul searching as to how we can stem and how the authorities can legislate for us to stop beating our children. Beating a child doesn't make it learn in any way, shape or form. So that's the beginning. The other thing is, whilst we are and we should be deeply concerned about violent crime using weapons and that result in serious injury and homicide, I think, again, it starts much earlier. We should be, as a society, at all levels, we should be sensitized to people with mental health issues in our communities, people with alcoholism, range of antisocial behavior. Some people may say, well, if it's criminals who are harming and injuring each other, why should the rest of us be bothered? But it tarnishes the whole of our community. If people start shooting each other and stabbing each other and killing each other, it must have a corrosive impact on the whole of that community and the whole of our country and the whole of our region. And also, often, violent crimes of rape and serious sexual offences, serious assaults and homicides, the parties are often known to each other. And so I think, as the previous speaker spoke about looking for solutions, it's something that all of us, wherever we are as individuals, groups, organizations, police are the lead agency in crime prevention, crime reduction, crime detection, but all of us have to play a role. Schools, churches, youth organizations, community groups and organizations, parliamentary representatives, chairs and councillors of village councils, all of us have to be involved. We can't just leave it to the police. It doesn't matter how well police are trained, it doesn't matter how well resourced police are, without information, intelligence and evidence from communities, the best trained and the best equipped police services will not eradicate crime as a whole and violent crime and serious injuries and assaults from that blight our society. Now, with our police having the lead, they have a big part to play in engendering the trust and confidence in communities. There's nothing worse, and I have heard it in Dominica from citizens saying, well, I gave the police information, intelligence, and evidence. And unfortunately, before they got back to the police station, somebody was on to me saying, why are you informing about me? So it's a big responsibility on police, and those who lead the police have to make sure that the level of integrity and trustworthiness to enable members of the community to come forward, to stand up to be counted, that is taken seriously, and any breaches of that is taken seriously and dealt with appropriately. And we really need our police leaders to lead and to manage by what we call intrusive supervision. So if someone calls and says, look, their dog's loose and it's killing all my animals, can I have police to help me? If someone calls up and say, look, someone's been burgling my house or my shop or my snacket, you need a positive police response. And you have to build into the system that if someone is not getting the help, support and assistance, there is a police officer of sufficient seniority that citizens can go to and get some response to make good any deficiencies by individual officers. So it's a collective effort. In terms of the whole criminal justice service, our police need the support of politicians of all colors and beliefs. And they must feel, and it must be evident, that they have the resources to do the work. So, for example, I remember a little while ago, there was a spate of what can only be termed daylight executions in Roseau of serious organized criminals who were feuding with each other. And then some came from Grand Bay, some came from other places, and executed people in broad daylight in Roseau. Now, when such people, I'm not talking about specific cases here, I'm saying in general terms, when such crimes of violence and murder is done in broad daylight, our criminal justice system should reflect the seriousness of such cases. And when police do the hard work and bring those suspects before the court, there should be a bail in these cases should be an exception rather than the rule. When someone is facing a charge of murder or illegal use and possession of firearms, bail should be a rarity and it should be an exception. So for society to take it seriously and for society to see the authorities are taking it seriously, these people must be locked up, and also their trials must be expedited. It doesn't matter how horrendous a crime you've committed. Justice delayed is justice denied. So someone facing a serious assault charge or a serious weapons charge or a homicide charge, their trial should be expedited. They shouldn't be languishing on remand for 5 years and such lengthy periods. So that's, you have to wonder how the police officers have done the hard work to bring such people to justice, how they must feel when that person is out on bail in no time. You must want, the rest of the population must wonder when people have illegal weapons and they are executing people in broad daylight, how they can be out and bail in the twinkling of an eye. So I think I'll stop it there. So we all have to be involved. We can't turn a blind eye. The small things lead to the bigger things. And we all have to, whatever our political beliefs and who we support, all of us have to make a joint effort to support our police, but also hold them to account. I am not sure if in Dominica and across CARICOM more widely, if someone has a genuine concern about police lack of action, whether there is a process for having an independent investigation that's going to take those concerns seriously. And for example, if you have a corrupt police officer who's undermining such serious investigations, how well equipped the system is to deal with that and say those people don't belong in our police service. So as I say to the communities, to all the churches, pastors, bishops, priests, your job is not just to have a sanitized sermon in church. You have to get your hands dirty in the community with the parliamentary representatives, with the village councils, with the bishop people, the shopkeepers and the farmers. It won't happen unless all of us join forces and stop turning a blind eye, whoever is responsible. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Dr. David Michael. I know that we're having some challenges with the technology that you're using, but I hope you'll be able to jump in a little later on as we go along, because we'd love to hear from you again. We know you have a lot more that you want to contribute. I want to go over to Simeon Joseph, and I'm happy to go over to Simeon Joseph because he's this man who has been spending so much time working on youth. And we know people tend to say, well, assume that most of the things are happening is youth, but I have a lot of crime is being committed. That is not youth committing the crime, in fact. And I hope Simeon can tell us a little bit more about those, because it seems to me that our society and in the society in the Caribbean, you have crimes of all sorts at all levels. And Simeon, I want to go over to you to get your word in there, because we've heard from Dr. Andre, we've heard from Dr. Peter Saint-Jean, we've heard from David Michael. Let's hear from you on some of that thing on crime. You don't mute the mic,
yes,
right?
Okay. So good evening, Mr. G. Good evening.
Hi, Simeon.
Good evening, Sejar and Michael. You know, I'm sitting and I'm listening, and one thing is echoing through my mind. And, you know, yesterday we had on Q95 Mr. Bernard Wiltshire. And I listened intently to that interview. And while I'm listening tonight, and thank you, Dr. Andre, for such a wonderful overview and challenging reflection on our society, and also to Michael a while ago, who pointed at some, shortcomings in our system, in our justice system, in our criminal system. And I think I'm happy that he was able to make those points. But the question I want to ask is, as I think of how crime and violence progresses itself in our society, and reflect in particular, as I said, on what Mr. Wiltshire spoke, the question I have to ask is, are we killing ourselves? Are we killing ourselves? Are we responsible for our own demise to the extent that the things that we do would mean that as we look at little by little, how are we strangling ourselves, our societal cohesion, our economic growth and development, okay, our personal development, our community togetherness? How are we strangling ourselves and almost becoming? And it seems to me that we are almost having a benign neglect of a substantial number of our youth and other people, and which will begin to haunt us. I am beginning to realize that the more we neglect what is happening in our society and our young people, it will haunt us in the long run. And if remedial action is not immediately taken to ensure that we stem the tide of all these gruesome things that happen in our country, we will eventually reach a stage where we have nothing to rescue. Okay? Because the level of crime and the level of violence, I mean, when one sits or one watches what happens in little Dominica, in a small community like Bath Estate, in a close-knit community like Yampis, I mean, communities in Dominica are not constituted of tens of thousands of people. The average community in Dominica is for the most 2,000 people. Even Roseau, you could say, is almost empty. And you ask yourself, when you see those things in such small, close-knit communities happening in Dominica, are we neglecting to pay attention to the issues that will haunt us in the future? And I'm very glad that Michael was able to pay some attention to what we can encapsulate as misgivings in our system. A system that has become almost devoid of tackling crime, of handling all the things that we see. And he raised some very significant points. Bail for people who commit gruesome crimes and murders. The delay of court cases of people who have committed heinous crimes. The growing number of people who seem to think, and one of the things I think I might get a lot of flack for is what is surprising me more is we seem to be developing a gun culture in Dominica, where many of our well-to-do people, many of our notable people, young men, seem to be on that craze to purchase guns, to brandish the fact that they can use a gun and shoot a gun. We have a company in Dominica that is on a craze at making sure that almost half of the population is purchasing guns, and say, to what end? I mean, is our society so uncontrollable that we have to perpetuate and promote the sale of guns in a small society like Dominica of less than 65,000 people? Where are we heading with that? Why is it that we are moving untamed to the fact that there is a commercialization, so to speak, of the sale of weapons and guns, where we see on Facebook where people are promoting all people across our society learning to shoot guns? Who are they going to shoot? Who are they going to aim at? What are they targeting? Why is it so much becoming a status quo or a symbol of identity that people have? And we have to think about those things. We have to think of people socializing in a bar, and then here comes somebody and knock them out. And of course, the rumor is that, of course, this young man was supposed to have been arrested for a murder, and the case was never called. Well, that leads us to something else, because if you remember, Mr. G, the last time we spoke about that, I raised the concern of vigilante justice in Dominica. The fact that over the past 10, 15 years, we have had a multitude of murders, and we have had a delay of the cases being called. And so that will lead to a growth in the grievance of persons who would have lost their loved ones through violence means and would want to seek revenge and put justice in their own hands. And we need to put this responsibility solely at the police, the justice system, and the legal department in Dominica. Because if it means, therefore, that you are sending the implicit message that people can kill with impunity, then you are inherently spreading the tendency for people to think, okay, you can just snuff out a life, you know? And apart from that, we have a lot of other situations in Dominica where we have to really look at violence. And one of the things that often bothers me, as you rightly said, is the fact that when we examine the situations of crime and violence in Dominica and in our Caribbean societies, we tend to zero in on the youth. And as I am apt to say, yes, perhaps when you look at this kind of deviant behavior, it seems apparent that it is the youth. The question is, we have to look at from the positive perspective. And again, one of the things, and if Dr. Sejan was there, we would see is that one of the things that is lacking in Dominica is that kind of research. When last was there research on crime and violence in Dominica to determine what are the levels of crime, what are the areas of crime, to determine basic numbers, so that we are able to find out who is committing crime in Dominica, before we can just put a blanket statement that it is the youth. To the best of my recollection, the last few murders in Dominica were not committed by youth, but by almost middle-aged men, okay, who have been arrested for those things. I mean, just not too long ago, we have reached a stage in Dominica now where there is a growing number of policemen who are being arrested for all sorts of crimes, okay? And that should raise some concern for us as a very small society. And that is why I sort of reflect on the question, are we killing ourselves? Because in the end, you see, when we end up attacking each other, fighting with each other, and almost destroying our society, we will have nothing left. You know, there are those who propose that violence is something that is inherent to the Caribbean. I don't subscribe to that. There are some historical sociologists who would like to propose that because we have come from slavery and annihilation of the indigenous people and European colonization, that we obviously, as a Caribbean people, our legacy is violence, without looking at the fact that we as Caribbean people are very creative people. And the very creativity that resides in us, we can use that very creativity to form better societies, because we are small. We are not New York with millions of people. We are not other countries that have populations that are beyond control, beyond management. And these two words are significant. Why is it that we cannot manage a small society like Dominica of 65,000 people to ensure that we have a cohesive society where people can live in peace? And as Dr. Seja was referring to the peaceology movement, where people can live in peace. So what is there? And I am afraid that if we are to look at violence and crime from a holistic perspective, for want of a better word, our treatment of this topic will not be as easy as we would like to assume, okay? Because for those of us who have been in pastoral work and youth work and community work for a while, we will recognize that we are losing a battle against violence, drugs, and crime among our young people and among our population as well, okay? And I think as we approach the issue, we cannot approach it with from the perspective of all smoke and no fire, and just continue to have studies and conferences and rallies, etc., with no substantial strategies. Because it seems to me, every time we have some eruption of some disorder in society, we revert to some kind of talk shop, and nothing comes out of it. There have been several studies on crime and violence in Dominica and the Caribbean, and what has become of it? What has become of that effort to determine what substantial strategies that we can utilize to reach our people who may be involved in some of those crimes? You know, when we were growing up, you know, people in a normal community would think twice about hurting another person from that community. And now it seems to me that people don't think twice anymore about the destruction that they cause to others. But I would like to propose that if we are to look at crime and violence, violence per se and crime cannot be the starting point of our discussion. If we want to develop and effectively process to deal with those issues, and the symptoms that arise. Because you see, violence and crime is a symptom of things gone wrong in our societies. Okay? Violence and crime sometimes is the cry of the poor who have been left out in the rapid development that is taking place in the world in many forms and fashions, where people would have been deprived of the fair share of the economic pie and not being able to cope in this pluralistic thrust of development. Violence sometimes can be the consequence of dreams denied and deferred and snuffed out. When we have to think of so many of our high school graduates, and it's growing. I have met many young people who have graduated from high school 10 years ago and cannot find a job, who have been denied the opportunity for their own personal growth and development. You see, and so we have to look at those things very clearly. How does a system that perpetuates denial and deference and the snuffing out of the dreams of young people account for what is happening in society today? Now, when we have young people who grow up, leave school at 18 and 30, 31, 32, have never been gainfully employed. These are critical questions we have to ask. That these people have to get up in the morning at 6 o'clock, sit on the side of the road until 10 o'clock, and the only beneficial developmental activity they may have done for the day is to sit on the side of the road, smoke ganja, talk nonsense, and go and sleep. And it repeats every day, 7 days a week, 30 days in a month, 12 months a year. These are critical questions. Can we examine perhaps how does violence and crime come from the consequences of our socio-economic systems which have gone wrong? Where it seems that there are people where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, because there is that economic divide that sometimes alienates people from becoming self-sufficient. These are things we have to consider. And then another thing we have to look at as we look at our societies and what we have become, particularly from a country like Dominica, where that was so much of the bedrock of community development and kudme and people helping each other. That we have become a society where we perpetuate a gospel of greed and materialism and competition against each other and aggressiveness and individualism. This seems to be the values that are perpetuated in our societies today. And where a gospel, in other words, from a spiritual perspective, the gospel of greed and materialism and competition and aggressiveness and individualism has replaced a gospel of life, community, faith in others. Now, we can also ask, and there are many questions we can ask, that is crime and violence a consequence of our political systems that have been promising but not delivering? Where election after election after election, you have politicians going on platforms and making glorious promises to young people and not delivering. And politicians too, you know, where we promise the masses things and just to get a vote, and then in the end, what do? We forget them. And then again, to take it wider afield, how has science and technology in our region, in our educational system, been designed to prepare the privileged few to deal with a world that no longer exists? And so that they can deal with a world where, because the educational system we espouse, which is very homogeneous, we send out into work our youth who are functionally illiterate, with no qualifications, except for unskilled labor perhaps, and lower entry-level positions. And this is perpetuated by a system where a high school education is still only a privilege for many and not a right, even in the advent of universal secondary education. That we have initiated universal secondary education, and the irony is that in as much as we have initiated universal secondary education, which means universal secondary education for all, which is supposed to be inclusive, a number of our young people have been alienated from the system, that they cannot maximize and reach their full potential, even with the opportunity to access secondary education. Okay, and there's lots more that can be looked at. The breakdown of our family structures, you know, unemployment and poverty, you know, and all those sorts of things that we have to critically look at.
But I'd like us to look at that a little later on.
Okay, yes, we have to look at those things very seriously, because you see,
we absolutely must. But
in closing, crime and violence is a societal problem. Doesn't exist out of the vacuum, and so we have to look at the whole of society: the family, the education system, the economic opportunities, the political system, the religious system. Because crime is not devoid or divorced from the society in which we live. And that's why I begin with the question, are we killing ourselves? Because if our society is one that generates death, that doesn't perpetuate life, we will all be persons who are dead in one way or the other, spiritually, economically, socially, educationally, and psychologically, emotionally, and in every aspect of our lives. And then we will have now a decaying society, which we will not be able to rescue unless we are able now, as I said at the beginning, to strategize as a society. And just in closing, I would like to say from the very beginning that this is not something for one set of people. It's not the government alone. And the government mustn't think that it is your job alone. We have reached a stage in Dominica where religious denominations need to put their differences aside. The Catholics and the Pentecostals and the Seventh Days and the Methodists must realize this is affecting our entire society. And they need to put their you could almost say, arrogant religious beliefs aside, cast that aside in the interest of the cohesion of the very society that they are trying to save. And the political forces that are there, you know, in the name of saving our society. This is not a time for Labour and UWP and Freedom and APP, because in the end, who will you rule? And those who assume governance will realize that they will have a greater problem on their hands when they do try to bring the society and the business society. And I am one person who is very disappointed with the role and the involvement of the business society in Dominica, the Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce, the Dominica Tourism Association, the Hotel and the Dominica Employers Federation. These people seem to me to be bent on just making profits without their direct involvement into how they can help to stabilize the society. Because economic development can be severely impacted if crime and violence is perpetuated.
And Simeon, I want to thank you so much for that intervention. I mean, you've touched on so many things. This is the purpose of the discussion here tonight. It is not just one little thing in a vacuum. It really is not. And I'm sure that Dr. Irving Andre will tell us. I mean, it's the whole of society. You said, I mean, it's the whole of society was that. And Dr. Andre, I just wanted to just say this, not to divert from this, because this is something we're not going to be able to discuss tonight. But I was listening a little earlier on to another show, The Other Side, where there was a discussion, and some of that discussion was about things like electoral reform and political parties' conduct and people's behavior and the things that they were saying. I mean, and if some of those persons are going to be role models, so these people who are supposed to be committing crimes and so on, we're going to need another discussion. So I'm hoping that next week we can look at that, because you see what Simeon is saying, it takes a village, it takes a community. It does not only mean it's the government or the police. You have to look at the whole political system. You know, the way the court system operates, you know, well, people feel they're disenfranchised or marginalized. I mean, can you think about this? That you go to school for how many years? You graduate from high school or college, and you can't get a job for 15 years. What does that really mean? Who's really looking after the people? Do we really, I mean, what are we doing? Do we really care about our people? The question is, if there are no statistics, how do we show that we care if we don't even have statistics to know how many people we have, where they are, what is their state of poverty or mendicancy, or how are they doing socially? And does anybody care? I mean, I think Simeon is right. Dr. Andre, I wanted you to come in and give us a little bit more of this, because it seems to me what we're saying is that this thing is a lot more intricate than some people would like to make it appear, as if it's just a few guys doing a few bad apples doing some things. It might be very much deeper than we think in society, and it may not be just youth. In fact, we have no idea, because we don't have statistics. We don't know whether it is 1% of the youth. We're talking about real youth that is involved in that, or 2%, or whether there's 20% of adults involved. We don't know. We don't have the statistics. Dr. Andre?
We don't have the statistics because we are not committed to getting to the root of the problem. And therein lies the fundamental problem. That if we insist on seeing it as probably a few bad apples, if we insist on looking at it as perhaps the depraved mentalities of some impoverished young persons, then we are basically stuck in this analytical hole. And the question is there this societal commitment to look at it, to understand it, to remedy it? And again, as Dr. Sejan, Dr. Michael might tell you with respect to their own communities and so on, historically, the whole question as to the investigation and prosecution of crime, it has a certain social context. Disproportionately, it is those who are at the bottom of the ladder in terms of criminal activity who gets punished and who gets the full brunt of the criminal justice system. The whole question as to getting to the root, for example, if there's a connection between drug activity and gun violence, drug activity creating that hostility between various groups of young people and so on, and the end result of which is death. If in fact there is such a connection, the question is, what are we doing as a society to deal with that fundamental connection, to deal with that influx of drugs, unmitigated, unstoppable from South America? What are we doing seriously to put a dent into that, over and above relying on U.S. intelligence and taking the boat and taking the boat out into the sea and running after or chasing after a couple of fellows who outpace them in their own multi-engined boats and so on? What are we seriously doing to deal with the root of the problem? And the question is, if we're not dealing as much as we can to deal with the roots of the problem, then the question is, why is that the case? The inconvenient question is that, are some of those policymakers involved in that type of activity? Because if hypothetically they are involved in the activity, then there's no commitment to deal with the root problems of that type of action. So what you have is an ongoing train or unstoppable train. You may have different victims. You have different locations in terms of that type of a criminal activity, but the activity persists, and it persists unabated. And therein lies the problem. Leadership matters. There has to be some understanding or some commitment to understand the roots of the problem. There shouldn't be any suggestion or accusation that there is a conflict of interest between those who are charged with the responsibility of dealing with that problem and those who may be benefiting from that problem. And the question is, have we reached that stage where law enforcement, where the whole question of making decisions to reverse that type of destructive violence, have we made the societal committal to reverse that trend? And if not, why not? Is someone benefiting? Is some groups of persons in decision-making positions benefiting from that type of activity? These are the honest questions that we have to address, because the problem will not disappear. The problem is fueled by, and Simeon may be absolutely correct, by greed, the easy aggrandizement. And we talk about values. Is crime the result of a poverty of values? And if so, why is it so? Is it fueled by the belief that it is better, probably with one or two transactions, to be wearing fancy clothes, driving a fancy car, attracting a number of girls, women, whatever, than to do it the old-fashioned way? Now, Dr. Michaels made a point that I don't entirely endorse. I think he made the link between corporal punishment and violence. Christ, I mean, I was subjected to a lot of corporal punishment, come to think of it. When I was at a grammar school, there was a beautiful book called the Black Book. And the Black Book was like a reign of terror. And I can tell you that that had a significant deterrent on myself and many of my generation. And guess what? It certainly taught us the lessons that we needed to know, to learn. And guess what? Generations of young Dominican students grew up under that regime of corporal punishment. And quite frankly, it was an ameliorating effect, not only on their bottoms, but on their ambitions. So I don't necessarily agree with that linkage between corporal punishment and violence. I believe, again, it's a society's commitment to inculcate those values, the transmission of values that engender good citizens, that make persons say, you know what, I will not engage in this type of activity. Rather, I'm going to spend hours and hours trying to be the best I can be, so that at least I can achieve my goals and make a contribution to the society. The whole question of civics, Gabriel, Christian, and a number of others have talked about the absence of civics as a subject in school. The whole question of the cadet corps, those institutions which we grew up and which we cherished because they inculcated certain values of being a good citizen. They are conspicuous by their absence today. What do we have? But not only that, you have to look at the technology and the foreign influences that impact decisions of young people. The internet is a powerful tool for good, but it is also a powerful tool for bad. Because through the internet, you get exposed to certain things which, quite frankly, are inimical to your progress in life as a good citizen, as a caring citizen, as one who is prepared to help his or her fellow man. You're introduced, for example, or too many of our young people, I should say, are introduced to music which preach a gospel of misogyny, a gospel of racism, a gospel of intolerance, a gospel of getting rich at any cost. And that transforms itself into a certain type of attitude, into a certain type of insatiable appetite to gain things without working for it. One of the big activities in Dominica is the spate of burglaries throughout Dominica. The police seem to be ineffective to deal with that issue in small Dominica. They may catch somebody from, what's that little village above that cemetery at Newtown? Next thing, he ends up dead. And the type of activity continues unabated. What are we doing as a society to deal with that type of scourge? You see? Why is there this desire to sacrifice your future by stealing a few tools from somebody's home? and selling it to somebody who is doing the buying. You see, Dominicans are smart, because growing up they would say, what's the saying again? Si pani sutue pani vole. Who is doing the buying? I know someone, speaking of the person in the mirror, whose house was broken into 3 times within a couple of months. And what was stolen were tools, things which could be sold. It was a waste of time to report it to the police. Who is doing the buying? Who is being prosecuted for buying these things? And as long as the buyer remains out there making profit on stolen goods, then the activity will be perpetuated. And you have to ask yourself, who is the real criminal? The well-connected buyer of the goods, or the person who breaks into a window and goes into a house and steals what's there? The question is simple. Do we as a society have the resolve to attempt to deal with the roots of those problems? Or are we just intent to cosmeticize it, to deal with the so-called few bad apples? And there's twice as many so-called or future bad apples waiting to replace them, even after those who are caught are incarcerated for a significant period of time. And another thing is, in terms of our jails, we don't talk about that, do we? What type of remedial programs exist in our institutions of incarceration? Well, there's only one, Stock Farm. What are they exposed to? Is the one on Stock Farm, is it an incubator of criminal activity? Are there any separation between persons we describe as hardened offenders and those young impressionistic persons who find themselves in that environment? What kind of programs do we offer to them? There's no doubt in my mind there are some programs, but is there any assessment of the efficacy of these programs to create good citizens? And to harken on something Simeon said, or do we mentally or psychologically or unconsciously, do we have in our mind that there are certain persons who are throwaways, expendables, persons beyond redemption, persons for whom too much resources should not be spent on because they are lost souls? And how do we define lost souls? Is it on account of their social status or lack thereof? How do we define those things? How do we decide how much resources we should spend on one type of protection, one type of law enforcement, and not on the other? The whole question of bail is another story in and of itself. You see, I agree with Dr. Michael in terms of bail and murder. The release of persons is a last resort in my respectful view, and in many jurisdictions that I'm aware of, in terms of someone charged with murder. And we in Dominica, we should know that, because there are instances where persons released on bail after being charged with murder have found themselves dead on the streets, because there's a certain religion on the streets. It's called revenge and retribution. It's not redemption. People taking the law in their own hands. And if the reports I read about this fellow who was killed in Bath Estate is true, then that philosophy accounted for the death of this young fellow, irrespective of the presumption of innocence, which should have been protecting him. So we have to basically look at critically all those avenues which may play a part in accounting for the spate of criminal activity in Dominica. These are not just bad apples. Dr. St. Jean said that crime is a social construct. He's absolutely correct. But so is punishment, and so is redemption, and so is rehabilitation. Are we committed to put the resources to change that paradigm shift? Are we prepared to look critically at those who we believe, or we fool ourselves into believing, are above these types of activities? Are we prepared to address those critical issues? Because as Simeon Joseph has said, we're looking at the inevitable or inexorable death of the community if those problems continue without any checks, without any abatement. That's my position.
And I have to be honest with you, Dr. Andre. I have not seen anything yet which tells me that it will not continue unabated, because I don't see anything being done about it, frankly. I wanted to, I know that Simeon, you have a lot more, but I wanted to bring in, if I can, Dr. David Michael, because we know we have some little technical difficulty getting through to him. But if you're hearing us, Dr. Michael, I wish you would just come in and join the conversation and make a further contribution. So you can just go right ahead and jump in.
Thank you.
So Lambi, is Dr. Michael available now? Can you get him in?
Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me okay?
We're hearing you very well. Lambi answering.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. My point is not beating children. It's not about just my preference. There's been empirical and anecdotal evidence with many cases where young people have killed or seriously injured each other. And in every single case, they grew up in a household where they watched their mother suffer from domestic violence from their father. So for me, violence begets violence. But I don't want to get caught up on this one single point. The last speaker spoke, and I think he made oblique reference, but I think we can be explicit in terms of drugs-related public sector corruption. And I don't want to talk about specific or headline cases, but we know these cases exist, and everyone in the, all citizens, but especially those with responsibility in our criminal justice services should do their duty. Dominica's police, from the senior ranks to the most junior person, they are obligated to uphold the laws of Dominica and the Constitution of Dominica. They are not obligated to custom and practice. Their duty to the people of Dominica, their duty to the courts, is to uphold the Constitution and the laws of Dominica. Nothing more, nothing less. So it doesn't matter who the person happens to be, who is conspiring, who is instigating, who is benefiting from drugs-related public sector corruption, then our police are duty-bound to deal with it. I will go back to the issue of what happens at the courts and how it undermines the criminal justice process, and how it inculcates lack of confidence in the general public, and how it must demoralize the honest, hardworking police officers who want to do their duty. So, for example, there may be someone on remand for a serious assault or unlawful possession or use of a firearm, or for a homicide, and the case gets remanded and remanded and remanded, and one day either the investigating police officer turns up and offers no evidence, or the magistrate or the prosecutor says, I want to discontinue this case. So, for example, if the prosecutor says that, the magistrate or the judge should ask, why on earth are you discontinuing the case, or why are you offering no evidence? And for me, in such cases, instead of the judiciary just saying, well, the officers asked for it, or we've had 10 remands, I'm throwing this case out. In terms of taking crime and crimes of violence seriously, in those circumstances, the member of the judiciary ought to ask for the head of CID, or indeed the deputy commissioner or the commissioner of police, to come to court and provide an explanation as to how such a serious matter is being discontinued or no evidence is being offered. And as has been said before, we have a presumption of innocence. But when it's such a serious matter and there's been loss of life or unlawful use and possession of a firearms, we can't just dismiss or offer no evidence because we've got bored with the case. That raises all sorts of questions about how seriously we take crime in general and violent crime in particular, of how it is disposed of at court. And as I said, if someone is involved in human trafficking and the punishment from the judiciary is a fine, it means we're not taking the human trafficking seriously. That should call for a long period. You may find the person, but to act as a serious deterrent and to show the view of the general public and of the judiciary, any such person should have a long period of imprisonment, even if they have to be deported to another country after that. But the law officers of Dominica, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Attorney General, they really ought to look again at the disposal of cases, the sentencing guidelines, and this question of bail. Serious organized crime should not have the comfort of knowing that it doesn't matter what serious crime, what organized crime they are involved in, they will be getting bail at the next court hearing. If we really mean it, if we want our society to be one where we say to our children and young people, and to say to our society at large, we want to be a productive, progressive Dominica, then the resourcing of our police and our criminal justice service has got to be a marker on this. I know that senior police officers, and I've seen it at first hand, will never do or say publicly anything to give the impression they're not getting the political support to do their duty. But we don't need our chief of police to tell us how much support they're getting when we can see with our own eyes the levels of support. Another thing in terms, I didn't say in my earlier remarks, if we are to give the public and communities trust and confidence to come forward with information, intelligence, and evidence about crime so our police can do their duty, we need a lot more visibility of our police officers in the daytime, during office hours, certainly in Roseau and Portsmouth and Granby and other places. But in all the villages, we need a police sergeant to pull up in the pickup vehicle and deploy officers to walk around the villages. And this kind of interaction with the community doesn't have to be prescribed, but the more of a surprise it is, the more effective it will be. And the more police officers walk around communities or drive in communities and communicate with shopkeepers and farmers and fisher people, the more information, intelligence, and evidence, and the more people will see that the authorities are taking seriously whether people are stealing farmers' produce or stealing shopkeepers' produce or are dealing serious drugs in the community, people will be more motivated to come forward. But this question of bail or disposing of cases with no sanctions to those who are perpetrating the misery onto the communities is something that has to be taken seriously, and it has to be looked at. But we must see our police officers must be more visible, must be more interactive with the communities. It's no good just making headline statements about community policing. Even though I was a beneficiary, it's no good hiring consultants and making statements. We've got another consultant. The senior officers have to take responsibility on a day-to-day basis. And there has to be intrusive supervision of what happens in this day's duties. How many calls have we had? What were the calls? Who is supervising? Who's the corporal and the sergeant supervising? Who's the inspector overseeing the whole day's work to make sure that local residents in Dominica and all communities in Dominica are getting the level of policing and justice that we all deserve? Thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Michael. Simeon, we want to open the lines in about 10 to 15 minutes. So let the viewers and audience have to say, because it's very important to hear the views, your feedback. So in about 15 minutes or so, Lambi, we will open the lines. I'll get back to you in a couple of minutes. But Simeon, I want to first to get real, and I'm just putting the question on the table for us all, because it seems to me that we cannot act as if our heads are buried in the sand. I mean, is there a breakdown in law and order in Dominica? That is one question. Is there a breakdown in the whole system of justice? Is there a breakdown in the whole question, the prosecutorial system? I mean, because we hear all kinds of things about things being nolly prost and cases taking 5 years. I mean, let's be real, Simeon. Is there really a breakdown? And if there is, how do we change that thing? I mean, that is why I want to go back next week. I want to come back at this thing, because it's important, because it's solutions. We had to find solutions. And so we must, because I listened to a discussion earlier tonight, and I really have to have something to say about some of those things that I heard, because it's unbelievable what I heard, right? Now, Simeon, let's talk about this. Is there a breakdown in law and order? Breakdown in the justice system? Let's talk about it.
I would add one word as an addendum, but it's interesting that you're asking me this question and you have Justice Irving Andre on the
it's for all of us. It's for all of us.
The preeminent justice in the midst. But I would first of all like to fully endorse everything that Michael just said. And I think I am going to be bold and brave enough to say that I don't think we only have a breakdown in the justice system in Dominica. And I'll be held to task and maybe even victimized and persecuted and prosecuted for the next statement I'm going to make, but I will make it. I think we have a very corrupt system in Dominica, justice system in Dominica, from what I know and from what I've heard. Because you see, one of the things that we need to be mindful of is this, that when people escape the justice system, they don't go quiet. They are brave about it. They will boast about it. A lot of our young gangsters and young people in drugs and who have committed crimes will actually spell out how they were able to escape prosecution, how they were able to escape justice. Some of them will tell you who they have in high places and who they have in the police force and who they have in the justice system that enable them not to face justice. Now, if these things are true, and they will tell you that, let us look at what happened today, I understood, in Yampis when the police went to arrest someone and the community decided, no way are we going to cooperate and allow you to perform your duty. It means, therefore, that the police has lost respect in the eyes of the public. And you would be surprised, I would dare say that 80% of Dominicans are not willing to support the police in their venture. Why is that so? Why have we reached that stage where we have a lack of confidence in the police system? Where there is lack of respect for the police and lack of confidence in the justice system. How have we reached that stage? And it's very obvious. I mean, our contributor before, Michael, made some very sterling observations. The delay of court cases, the disappearance of evidence, the fact that people can go to court to prosecute things and then you have cases being thrown out. Let us look at basic scenario. How is it that someone in Dominica can be seen to shoot someone, to stab someone to death with a multitude of witnesses, with a full knowledge of the community and bystanders and witnesses, and then for 10, 15 years, that case is never brought to court? And then you see these people driving around with the most expensive cars, BMWs and Mac-X and all those sorts of things, in the company of leading policemen and lawyers and politicians, with parading around town like as if they are immune from punity and justice. How is that? Where does that bravado comes from? Where does that overt machoism to flaunt yourself in the public in spite of what you may have done come from? Where does that come from? It is telling. It is self-explanatory. And it is beyond the suspect. Because as I said, Dominica is a small place. Our communities are small. And everybody knows what is happening. And above all, some of these people become even more emboldened about those things. How is that people can be arrested for drugs, public servants arrested for drugs, and the case goes on, and next thing you know, they are still employed in the public service, and even sometimes given promotions and opportunities in the public service? These are telling things. These are sobering questions that we have to ask. Of course, barring innocent until proven guilty. As again, Dominica is a small place, and everybody knows. Everybody knows. How is that you have some of these young criminals who can tell you, oh, I have so-and-so in the police force, and so is my friend, and they say that. And I'm not the only person who can. So when we look at that, when we look at these scenarios, when we look at the delay of the wheel of justice, when we look at the fact that the police can wantonly and knowingly, at the snap of a finger, decide to prosecute certain people over certain people for certain things, and are able to use their intelligence to go behind, even say, political opponents to the government. And when other people on the other side do the same thing, they go scotch-free. How is that? These things, you see, for you to have a stable society, for you to have cohesion in society, justice, because you see, there are the three arms of government. There are the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. And out of the three arms of government, for the stability of good governance in society, if the judiciary, which is supposed to be the balance between the legislature and the executive, to ensure that the society effectively functions, if the judiciary falls apart, governance is dead. And if governance is dead, it means the justice system is dead. And if governance is dead, it means the security of the state is dead. And if governance, if the judiciary is dead, it means, therefore, that the safety and security of the nation is under threat. People must not live in a society where they think that they can break the law, and not only break the law, but know that when they break the law, the very law will protect them from breaking the law. Or that when they break the law, not only is the law protected them, but you have the legislature and maybe you have the executive undermining judiciary, which is supposed to create that level of confidence by the population in the system of government. And so you have a breakdown of society. And my concern is, I will go back to it, if we do not stem the tide of those things, you know, in Dominica in the next 5, 10, 15 years, where will we be? Where will we be? When are we going to send the message that certain things are tolerated and certain things are not tolerated? Why is it that in this country, sometimes there is a haste to prosecute and to persecute, prosecute certain people for offenses that are no threat to the security of the state? While other times you are asleep and dormant to the greater threats of society and your very own well-being. Because at the end of the day, when you allow crime and violence and those kind of things to perpetuate, you never know where it's going to end. It may end on your doorstep. It may come within under your very roof. And you might be indefensive to those very things that you allow to fester in society. And then what kind of society are we going to have? Are we going to learn from the countries in the world of today that have allowed their societies to break down to such an extent that they can no longer turn the tide around? You know, I have had the opportunity, while I worked in the World Conference of Churches, to visit places like the Lavalas in Brazil, where crime is in certain places in Haiti. I'm talking about places I have visited, in certain places in Nigeria, in India. Okay, having visited those places and recognized when in the Philippines, when you do not take the bull by the horn, sometimes, as I think Dr. Andre said it and Michael said it, you just leave them and you know, well, okay, well, leave the criminals, let them kill out themselves. Because we cannot control them, we cannot manage them. Again, I want to emphasize that Dominica is a very small country. If a minuscule population, 65,000 people is sometimes 4 building blocks in the Corp area of New York City. Okay, and so we have to be more mindful of the fact that we have a responsibility for the security, safety, and well-being of the state. And those in the judiciary and the police force and the justice system who are charged with ensuring that Dominica does not decay into some kind of animalistic society need to take responsibility or be more conscious of their responsibility to ensure that we do not go down that road. So the appeal has to be for the policemen who have the tendency to cooperate with illegal entities to do some serious self-examination, because in the end, they will not be able as the police force to police society. For the lawyers out there who are complicit with criminals and the rogue police people, to recognize that when you, as part of the legal system, undermine the legal system, you are making your very work of ensuring that the legal system in Dominica works against you, because you never know tomorrow who is going to be corrupt to turn against you.
See, Simeon, you see, I really open the question to all of us on the floor, because I think this is really the question, you know, because we can't beat around the bush on this. Question is everything has broken down, is not broken down? Now, we know, Dr. Andre, that we're supposed to have 3 branches of government. All 3 branches are supposed to be independent. But in Dominica's case, unfortunately, it seems as if the executive branch and the legislature are one and the same. Because the same people who are in cabinet, the same people who are in the legislature making the laws, And then, of course, if we're hearing from Simeon that it is apparent that the executive and the legislature may be undermining the judicial branch or the judicial system.
So, Mr. Gregoire, before you bring in somebody, are you telling me that the Minister of National Security, the Commissioner of Police, and the Security and Justice are not aware of all those things that are happening, so that they can be where is the National Commission that, or you could say the National Commission that is appointed by government to look at causes of crime and violence and to see how we can address that as an issue before it gets too late? Are you telling me they're not aware?
No.
Just as they can be aware of who is marching in Roseau and who's not marching in Roseau. Just as they can become aware of who is attending political meetings or making statements against the political directorate and to target them and to go behind them. Where is their very intelligence in this small society to go after these persons who overtly break the law and commit crime? And they may come after me tonight or tomorrow morning. Maybe 5 o'clock, I may have a gang of squad in front of my house for that statement. But the question must be asked.
But here's the question. I'm saying, in fact, that I'm presuming that they are aware. I mean, look, we keep saying this, and this is a fact. We have a very small, close-knit society. If you're telling me that somebody in Yampis or somewhere shoot somebody and nobody in there know about it and tell the police who did it, I mean, after all, that's a stretch of the imagination. It's too small for them not to know. Somebody must have seen or heard something. But when you talk about
that speaks to the level of respect.
Well, this is the point. You see, this is the point.
Yeah.
So here you are, Simeon. We're saying that this society is so small. They're bound to be aware of what is happening. The same way that we can be aware who's walking and was we given a summons because they walked. They are aware. So, Dr. Andre, I want to go to you before we open the lines, really and truly. Simeon spoke about the question of the undermining of the judicial system by the legislative branch or the executive branch, and the fact that this thing is so closely that everybody's aware of everything. I mean, when you appoint a police commissioner because you know him and you like him, I mean, there must be communication between them. There must be communication between the national security minister and the police and other people in the system. So why is it that we behaving as though we're not aware when it suits us, and then this breakdown is taking place and you have justice being unevenly distributed? Some people, have to wait 5 years, 6 years before a case is heard, whether it's on incitement, without any evidence. And then some other cases get heard very, very quickly and people get off on bail. Dr. Andre, you might be able to help us with that.
Well, let me start by probably making a cynical statement. You made reference to the 3 branches of government. Well, we have a lot of branches, but we don't have one tree. We don't have the tree of life. We don't have the tree of democracy. We don't have the tree of good governance. And the fact that when we speak of the breakdown of law and order, when we speak about the alleged failure of the judicial system, then the question is this by design or is it not by design? Let's face it. The anecdotal evidence is clear in terms of who gets charged and dragged before the courts, whose charges are adjourned indefinitely, and given some fancy legal term called sine die, which in life is a death, really, because you are being forced to have a criminal charge over your head for an indefinite period. And all jurisdictions have cases which say that, quite frankly, no citizen who has the presumption of innocence should have a charge over his head or her head for an indefinite period. When you look at these things, when you listen to the evidence which we've heard over and over again on the radio, then there's no question that this is not, the question is not whether the authorities don't know. On the contrary, the clear inference is that this is part of a specific and orchestrated policy. to criminalize certain persons for political reasons. So what we have to a significant degree is a politicization of the whole system of law enforcement and judicial decision making. When you have credible voices indicating that certain cases have fallen into a big black hole in the court system in Dominica without any prospects of resurrection, when you have, for example, allegations of a minister of justice or security, whatever he or she is, speaking to a judicial officer during a court proceeding, which is a cardinal sin because it offends the principles of the independence of the judiciary. All this is by design. This is not by accident. What you have is a perversion of justice, if in fact you wish to call it that. So that no reform, no improvement of the system, no serious attempt to address the whole question of crime and violence in Dominica can fail to address these fundamental issues in the whole question of enforcement and the whole question of judicial decision making. Because if these allegations are true, and it seems to me there apparently is significant evidence to support the fact that it is true, then the question is, who is destroying the reputation of the judicial system? Perhaps the system itself. Who is destroying the reputation of the law enforcement? It's law enforcement officers themselves. Oops. And this is the problem that we face. Bear in mind, there have been commissions of inquiry into the police years ago. In fact, the last one which comes to mind, in the late 90s, the head of the police and an acting head were retired in the public interest. There were rampant allegations of drug trafficking in the police. Today, the police face allegations of extrajudicial killings, unequal application of the law, and quite frankly, the use of the badge of police office to intimidate certain individuals. This is what is discrediting the police, and which is very unfortunate, because you have a significant number of police officers who are honest, decent officers trying to do their jobs, but whose ability to do so has been stymied. Because if it appears that they're not prepared to match to the drum of those who've been influenced by their political masters, they get sidelined. They are abandoned into small jurisdictions to serve in silence, literally, deprived of certain types of resources. And that is the reality. And who loses? The biggest losers are the community, persons in the community themselves, or those who have the audacity, as I've indicated in other contexts, to stand up and to exercise their rights. And the question is, to the extent that we continue along those lines, inevitably chaos will reign supreme. Why are we living in a society where those agencies, those institutions designed by the Constitution to uphold the rule of law, to uphold the tenets of a democratic society, are themselves undermining the role that they should play in that society? And the question is, what do we do about it? Because I can tell you, the fruit of that approach is absolute chaos, sooner or later. And there'll be no redemption. There'll be no redemption song for Dominica if we continue along those lines. But I see Dr. St. Jean has made an appearance, so I'm going to stand by and give him an opportunity to speak.
Yes, we will give him an opportunity to speak in a minute, Dr. Andre. But, we have to go to Lambi to take a few calls from the people. So Lambi, you'll give them the number, but I just want to say this as I go over to Lambi, Dr. Andre. You know, Simeon just warned us about what he saw in Haiti, what he saw in several other countries, the Philippines, you know. And really, do we want to go that way? Is that where we're heading? Do we really want to go that way? Are we not going to take stock of what is happening? Are we blind? Can't we see where this thing is heading? So I just want to go over to Dr. Andrew. You wanted to?
Yeah, I was going to say again, it goes back to what is it that we want as a society? We want our own little cubbyhole where we get benefits from the state or for the political directorate, and to hell with us, the other suckers who decide to stand up on principle for governance and integrity and decency in governance? That is the fundamental question. That is why some of us are blind. That is why some of us have looked the other way. You see, that is the problem. We have a poverty of morality in Dominica to a significant degree. Not everyone maintains that type of posture. You made reference earlier on, Mr. G, to the whole question of the ostrich in the sand. It's worse. What we have altogether, and sadly, are a number of Tutulus in their little holes where they seek shelter from the ravages of this world.
Tululus, huh? Lambi, let's take a few calls. Let me go over to you, give the people the numbers, and let's engage our listeners and our folks on the social media platforms. And
the Global View and Q, taking your calls right now. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624, and the whole switchboard here is lit up like a Christmas tree. Let's take this first call. Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Lambert, Mr. G.
Yeah.
Judge, everybody on the panel. Gentlemen, this is not an exaggeration, you know. Somebody may be listening to this and thinking, this bunch of people here are exaggerating. There are real examples of this problem that we face in Dominica. Some serious, realistic examples. And if I may try to cite some, you know, we have a high-ranking officer who went to school to pick up his daughter, ended up shooting a man who he thought was threatening his daughter in the school bathroom of some sort. And some months later, the case was tried, and it was just a farce. It was a complete farce. And that person went on to become the assistant commissioner in a very short period. I mean, this is serious. You know, it is very serious. You have the Minister of Security. He behaves as if the police commissioner is his servant. He's behaving in that way. There's no doubt in my mind that he's behaving that way. And I don't think that is his role. The commissioner, as far as I understand, should be completely independent and be applying the law equally to all. So we have a serious problem. And I don't know how we're going to solve it, but this problem is there nevertheless. Thank you.
And thanks a lot for that contribution. Lambi, you want to take a few more calls?
Yes, caller, you next. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Good evening, Lambi.
Good evening.
Yeah, the entire panel, good evening. I just want to ask Dr. Andrews a question. He's a lawyer, right?
I think so.
Oh. Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask you this. The election before 2019.
Right.
The election in Dominica the one before 2019, the kind of things I saw happen, I became frightened. So in 2019 now, before the election, I began to ask our Prime Minister a very, very legitimate question, whether he would accept defeat.
I heard you.
This time around, I get there's something. There's a feeling I have when I listen to all these allegations by Mr. Redjob. And I want to ask my Prime Minister some questions. I do not know law. I want to ask you. I already asked our first lawyer. He said yes, but I want to ask you again. Is it? Do I have the right as a citizen to ask the Prime Minister legitimate questions?
Well, you know the answer as well as I. Of course you do. This is supposed to be a democratic country You can ask whatever questions you wish. The fact that you're asking any questions does not impede, it does not deprive him of any rights that he has. You, as a citizen, you have a right of freedom of expression. You are not casting aspersions on his character by asking these legitimate questions, which are in the public interest. You have that right.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I begin to ask a very, very important one from next week. Thank you.
And thanks a lot for that. Lambi?
Yes, more calls coming in. Overseas line, go ahead, please.
Brother Lamberos.
Yes, sir.
How are you doing, my brother?
I'm doing pretty good. How is your family and how are you doing?
Everybody's fine. I just wanted to pay my respects to the Right Honorable Andre and the gentleman from Scotland Yard. But Brother Lambi, I want to tell you and Sheridan that Mr. Simeon Joseph has hit the nail right on the head tonight. Corruption in our judicial system. I know of a particular case in the system that every time it comes to the top, it is told to be put at the bottom of the matters for pending. And it's unfortunate, but what Simeon Joseph has said tonight, my brothers, it is so true, right on target. And Brother Simeon Joseph, my name is Jeffrey Brisbane of the Miami, and I want to thank you, sir, for hitting it right on the nail tonight. Have a good night, gentlemen, and I'm tuned in and listening.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good to hear from you. Lambi?
Next caller, go ahead, please.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I don't know if he's, I don't know the name of the gentleman that was talking about all the corruption and all this thing, but to me, you all addressed that. But let me just give one scenario here. There was a time that the Prime Minister's information from the IPO was actually put out in the public, and they accused the opposition leader, Lennox Linton, of doing so. The police was activated, sent to Lennox Linton's house to do all kind of search, want to do whatever it is, because it seems to me it's an arrestable situation right there. But when investigation come out, the same people, Tony Astafans and the Prime Minister, who activated or advised the police to go down there, they are the ones, investigations such as that, they are the ones that put it in public. And nothing happened from there on. I thought it was an arrestable thing, but it's based on who do it, get arrested for it. So this is where the corruption is. The judges are corrupt, and that's a serious problem, in this. The magistrates and judges are very corrupt. We are in serious trouble down in these Caribbean islands. All right, man, thanks.
I don't know whether that somebody wants to have a response to go on this. Dr. Andre, you wanted to?
Well, I mean, I think I know the case the gentleman is talking about, and he's absolutely correct. But again, here's another illustration as to the nature of law enforcement in Dominica. Do we have a police force which is living up to its principles of fair play, of even-handed justice, of investigating impartially and charging where such charges are appropriate? The evidence is clear. We cannot even contest it. Take, for instance, the most recent manifestation of uneven justice in Dominica, the serving of summons to persons who have decided to walk. I can indicate to you whether in Canada, whether in the United States, whether in Europe, there's a significant number of cases which stand for the proposition that irrespective of preconditions such as notifying the authorities, the right to a peaceful assembly is a right which cannot and should not be taken away from citizens, particularly in instances where there is no violation, there is no impeding of traffic, nobody walks on anybody's big toe, there is absolutely no justification, and the inescapable conclusion is that the decision to summons persons before the court is a political one. But this is what undermines the system. It is not people who are undermining the system by making false accusations against it. It's the actions of state agents who are acting in a very arbitrary fashion. Somebody I heard some talk. Somebody call a call on a program who said something to the effect that a problem of the system is that the police are acting legally. I don't know where that conclusion comes from. The police are acting based on the political directives that they receive. And that is the biggest threat to the system of law enforcement in Dominica. There are law-abiding officers who would do a job, who would love to do a job without interference, but their hands are tied behind their backs because the sword of retribution will fall on their necks if they let their true feelings known to all and sundry. That's the problem.
Yes, and Dr. Andres, I go back to Lambi. I just want to say this for purposes of the records that Q95 is not aware that the judges and the magistrates are corrupt. I thought I have to put that on the record. So Lambi, over to you.
Yes, caller, are you still there?
Yes, good evening.
Thanks for being there, and thanks for your patience. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I'd like to say that all what I've listened to tonight, you can summarize it in one word: bad governance. And I say that because we can see what's going on. Many of the things are, you can say, not provable, because you have a constitution that allows one person, the prime minister, to hire most of the people in the, for example, in the judicial system, the magistracy and other positions, police chief and so forth. When you have that kind of influence and people in this small community where jobs are scarce, where people do not want to lose their jobs, they do what you say, otherwise they go home. So their backs are against the wall. But I want to add one more point. When you have a justice system where the public is aware, at least a substantial part of the public is aware, crimes or potential crimes, I should say, committed by the political directorate, in some cases individualized or maybe more than one person, activities that they do not want the general public to know, for example, Choxy. Not even investigation is done. So when you cannot prosecute the political directorate, then you are really setting an example for those smaller crimes below. All those white-collar crimes, we call them. We're leaving that out, and we're talking about the crimes below. White-collar crimes. Which country where an opposition leader would accuse a government of having $4.2 billion unaccounted for outside our treasury, and the police will investigate? Which country where amounts like $400,000, $500,000 would be found? The police make an announcement. Boom, we hear nothing again. Or drugs or guns come in. We hear an announcement and then we don't know what the outcome is. That is where we have to look at. Not the guy who sells a couple joints on the street. Not the guy who, yes, but these are manifestations of what is happening from the political directorate, from on top. Okay? So I just wanted to make that contribution. Let's talk about what they call white-collar crimes as opposed to regular crimes. Thank you.
Certainly good contribution. I just want to say this as I go back to Lambi, that two things we've done on this show on the Global View on Q. We've recognized that there is a crisis of governance in Dominica. We've recognized that. I mean, it's not only Dominica, but that it exists. And I think the caller is quite right to raise the question. And we've also said on this show, in several shows that we've had, it is not such a good thing that when one government, one group stays in office for 20-something years. I mean, we've always said we like the American system, 2 terms, and you're gone. So we agree that after people stay in office for too long, I mean, they get spoiled and all kind of things are going haywire. So we stand by that. And I really would advise all the politicians, those inside, those outside, to consider 2-term limits and finish with that. So you don't get into all this Jew boom, as they call it. Lambi, Dr. Andre, you have a better word?
Nah, Jew boom is nice.
Jew boom is okay. So Lambi, let's take a few more calls.
Good evening, caller. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. A very good program. I'm listening to you all, and the escalation of violence and crime in Dominica is a serious concern. I would say not for labor rights or for UWCI, because with what is going on in Dominica right now, nobody's safe. I listened to a radio announcement sometime yesterday, I think it was, where the police was asking the public to cooperate with them if you had any information to make it available in the pursuit of solving a gun killing some part in the country. And I'm a law-abiding person. I believe I get better results with my living when I obey the law. In fact, I like the police, but then I'm saying that you will never get good results with all policing in our country unless the police and the public can work together. And I say, but the police is asking the public to cooperate with them to solve this crime. But it's the same public you harassing on Wednesday when they're walking on the road in Roseville. So you don't realize it's the same people you asking to help you. Now you have a problem, you need help, you can't solve the problem, you're asking the public to help you, but it's the same public you're going out back on Wednesday to give a summons for walking on the road. And I don't know how you expect to do that and secure the help and support of these people. On the other hand, also, I thought of another thing. People who commit murder, like the retired Scotland Yard officer was saying, in broad daylight with impunity, they get bail in the twinkling of an eye. And then I see you put a Dominican diplomat in jail. Up to now, I don't understand the charge now, if it's for insightfulness or incitement. I don't know what it is. Put a diplomat in jail, and he had to struggle to get bail when people are committing murder in broad daylight with impunity to get in bail in the twinkling of an eye. So the point is, I have a concern about this because unless the public can have better confidence and trust with the police, I don't know how we're going to deal with these issues, because these issues is not labor rights issues, and it's not UWPI issues, it's not non-aligned issues, it's not the 95 issues. Is that I'm saying with this present situation of crime and violence in Dominica, nobody is really safe. And so the public and the police must work together, but the public will not work with the police when the police continue to treat the public the way they're treating them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller. We do appreciate it. And let's take this overseas call. Good evening, caller. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. Back to you, Lambi, and good evening to the panelists. I just want to say outstanding contribution by a panelist tonight, especially that of Mr. Simeon Joseph. I can't add anything to what you guys have already said. But the one thing I would like to ask, since that we ask for solutions, what is the role of the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica? And what is the power of the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica to enact a commission of inquiry into the police service, it's pretty apparent that the current parliamentary leader, the leader of the parliament, wouldn't do it. So I would like us, after we're done tonight, to find out what powers does the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica have to enact a commission of inquiry into the police service and the justice system in Dominica. Because I think only then we will get redress for what has been happening in the police force, the politicization of the police force, the fact that the present Deputy Commissioner of Police has been implicated in the transfer of a citizen from one country to the next without due process, enabled by politicians in the Caribbean. That's the height of criminality. And I agree with one of the callers, we're talking about murders and stealing and robbery. But what about when people in high society commit crimes and get away? And seeing that our politicians and people in high society are so involved, I think it's at this point, we as a country should be putting pressure on the president in charge to initiate a commission of inquiry into the police service, into the judicial system, and to make sure that people pay for their actions. I'm listening, and I think you guys have a great contribution as always, and we should move to the next level, and I think that next level is action. Thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you. Appreciate that. One thing I would say, you see, my English is not as good as Simeon's English or Irving's English or David's English or Peter's English. But if the Prime Minister is able to take somebody from his cabinet and appoint him as president, then maybe that should answer the caller's question as to what are the powers of the president. Lambi, you want to take any more calls?
Yes, there's one more call in there. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening. I'm listening to the program. It's very thought-provoking. It's very enlightening and uplifting. I have two questions, one for Mr. David Michael and one for Dr. Andre. For David Michael, the gentleman just previously talked about the community policing aspect of the police force of the Commonwealth of Dominica. I want to be specific because they are recording, they are analyzing our programs, and I hope tonight, whoever that is recording, to bring to the commissioner that when the commissioner plays this tape tonight, they will see that no malice, no vilification, no name calling, and the panelists are there tonight to really see what's happening to our lovely Dominica, Ma Dominic. So, Mr. David Michael, the first question to you. How you find the police are approaching the whole community policing? They brutalize the public, the citizenry, yet still they want help from the citizenry when there's crime and violence. I'm not even hearing about 1-800 Crime Stoppers again. I don't know what's happening to that. Now there was so much crimes happening. Now to Dr. Andre. You worked in Canada as a judge or lawyer or a magistrate. What can be better implemented on island in terms of case management? In terms of, you said justice delay, and we all know that is justice denied. There are a lot of cases languishing, looking for dates in the magistrate court and the high court. We have a registrar, but that office seems not to be working. We have a director of prosecution. That office seems to be not working. With all the money the government wasting around, can I suggest to them an office of case management in all the court districts, have employ young people on laptops, on computer, put up spreadsheet programming or database to manage the cases, have a supervisor to see when the cases are coming up, make sure the files are in order, make sure the witnesses are served with the summons, and, let's have proper justice system in Dominica. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much for that. I don't know whether Dr. Andre, you want to go first, or maybe we should just take one more call from
okay, no problem.
Then we can hopefully on Dr. Michael's answer.
All right.
Get the conversation going again. Lambi?
Yes, on the overseas line, make a quick call, please. Go ahead. Caller, are you paying attention?
All right, so the caller will call back.
Okay, the question posed is, what can we do as a community to improve or to fasten the rate at which matters are brought to trial in Dominica and so on. There are a number of issues that a number of steps that could be taken. In the late 1990s, the UWP government, Mr. James, was able to, after speaking to his Australian counterpart, to get a few Australian judges in Dominica at the state expense. And these judges made a significant dent in terms of the backlog in cases which were languishing in the system. Similar resources could be applied or directed to the system. Not only that, but the main fundamental question is there a will, Mr. Caller? Is there a will to ameliorate the system in terms of the amount of time that persons have to wait for their matters to be heard in the court system? Dominica is a very small jurisdiction by any standard. It should not be taking so much time for cases to be heard. It should not be taking so much time for someone to get a title to his or her property. There is no rational reason to explain the reprehensible delay in getting a matter to trial. Yes, there are two judges, but surely to the extent that these two judges are overburdened, surely the system can ask and request and devote resources to get another judge. But the question is that delay just a matter of systemic delay? Or is it a delay which has been caused in some cases deliberately? Have some cases been held back in the system? And if that is the case, then it calls into question the integrity of the system, because no person should have to wait an inordinate amount of time, whether it's a criminal or civil matter, to have their cases heard. This is a very small jurisdiction. That's the bottom line. I wouldn't go into certain rules which could be instituted to ensure that matters are fast-paced in the system. The prosecution's office has a role to play in ensuring that matters are brought before the court. There are matters which have been stayed or dismissed for want of prosecution. That shouldn't even take place. The prosecution, to the extent that they have the resources, they have the evidence, they have a duty to make it their business to see that these matters are brought to court in a timely fashion. And failure to do so amounts to nothing more than a dereliction of duty. But the question is, are we just satisfied with the pace of proceedings? Is the Dominican public being served with that type of dysfunctional system? The system can be made to work better. It could be cleansed of these extrajudicial influences that seem to be clogging the arteries of the system. And why should Dominicans on the ground tolerate that? Because everyone should have the right, when they go to court, for their matter to be adjudicated by someone who is impartial and someone who is independent, not someone who may or may not receive marching orders from a member or members of the political directorate. That is one of the worst influences in the criminal justice system. And it shouldn't be if, in fact, it exists. And certainly, based on what I've heard, based on what I've read, there's a serious concern that, at least in certain cases, that is, in fact, the case.
And Dr. Andrew, before we let you go, in fact, in certain jurisdictions, like certain parts of the US, certain states in the US and maybe in Canada, isn't there some kind of time limit on those cases, that if a case is there languishing for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, that it is thrown out or something for want of prosecution?
Well, that is the case. I mean, Gabriel Christian has spoken about what is called the Hicks law, that cases have a certain period of time, I believe it's 6 months, between the time the charges are laid to the time the trial is held, for the case to be tried. Now, that period could be extended due to extenuating or exceptional circumstances. In Canada, frankly, throughout Canada, for a matter to come to the Superior Court, the amount of tolerable delay, constitutionally speaking, is 30 months. You know, And if that amount of delay has been caused either by the tardiness of the prosecution or by what we call systemic delay, and there are no exceptional circumstances justifying that delay, the charge will be what we call stayed. Not adjourned sine die, but stayed. And a judicial decision to stay a charge means that it is finished. It ends right there. Finibat. You know? Because again, the underlying philosophy is that no one should have a criminal charge or charges hanging over their heads for an indefinite period. You are talking about the liberty of individuals. You're talking about the integrity of individuals. Everyone is presumed and clothed by the presumption of innocence. That is the overarching philosophy which governs that approach to justice. Matters should be tried within a reasonable period of time. And there's no reason why they are not in Dominica. There's no reason when, just by coincidence, you have persons who at least are known or believed to oppose the government, are charged with charges of dubious integrity, and those charges are stayed indefinitely. That is a legal crucifixion, and that is wrong.
Before I go to Dr. Peter Saint-Jean, I wanted to go over to Dr. Michaels and see if he's with us. If he is, I just wanted to say this before I do that, though, that as you say this, Dr. Andre, I mean, it gets even more and more worrying every time you listen to this, that you have these charges of incitement hanging over the heads of members of the opposition. I'm not sure there's anybody else. It's just members of the opposition exclusively, it seems. And those cases have been languishing for 5 years. And there's still no daylight as to when they might be heard, when they might be prosecuted. I think it's really a pity that that is happening. And I really hope that the opposition, their lawyers, their attorneys, take the matter to the court and ask for dismissal for want of prosecution. Because it seems to me, if the problem is that the prosecutors cannot find the evidence to prosecute the case, then why is the case languishing like that, in limbo? So you see, so I have this way. So let me just go over to Dr. Michaels, if he can hear us. Did you want to say something, Dr. Andre?
Yes, I want to answer the question the caller put in about
yes
the state of community policing. One of the issues is that if a farmer, a fisher person, or a shopkeeper, a teacher, or a social worker, if they call the police about someone stealing their produce or assaulting them or assaulting someone in their family, and they get an inappropriate professional response and inaction to their call, just because someone makes a pronouncement about community policing is not going to give them the confidence that this police, the Dominica police, is for every citizen and every person. So that will undermine anything under the name of community policing. Again, I have made this public statement time after time. I personally support, in the interest of national security, that the Dominica police has contingency plans in the event of breakdown of civil order, that they have contingency plans to deal with that. And I'm very happy for the SSU or similar backup to wear any fatigues or whatever to show that the situation is such that they mean business and they're going to put an end to any possible insurrection. So I don't mind them wearing military fatigues on such an occasion. However, in the daily patrol of uniformed civil police officers, it is a complete contradiction, and in my experience, there is no operational policing imperative for a civil police, and specifically the model in Dominica for Dominica police officers to wear military uniform. There is no operational policing imperative for civilian police officers to be doing routine daily policing and wearing military fatigues. So that is a direct contradiction to any notion of community policing. Policing to engender trust and confidence in local residents, in villages and communities, wearing a military fatigue is a complete contradiction of that notion. I have to say, when I was retained by the government as a community policing consultant, I found police officers in Dominica of all ranks were very open-minded and were very willing to see how we could move forward with a model of community policing that was consistent with working in partnership with local residents and the community. So I think police officers are ready and willing to work with that model of community policing. But if the powers that be put them under the yoke of militarizing and any appearance of politicizing our police, then that is a direct antithesis and a contradiction of any notion of community policing.
Yes, and thank you so much for that, Dr. David Michael, because it's so important. But we keep having to make these references all the time, and are we the only people who are seeing this thing is falling short? That, we cannot be talking about community policing on one hand and then on the other, and see what happened, and maybe what happened in Yampi's might serve as a case, because I understand the police, when they're looking for assistance and the community doesn't trust them. I think the police need to develop more trust, and I think Dr. Michael's Roddy has a good point.
Mr. G, and I want to share two examples. In Salisbury, what happened in Salisbury? How does that foster community policing? But allow me to share, maybe for the first time publicly, two situations that I faced. On the 16th of May 2001, I reported a very troubling and dangerous matter to the police station in Wesley. I went to work. By the time I returned home, my life was threatened by the person whom I made the report against. And they told me to my face that, yes, the police told them I made the report at the Wesley police station. That doesn't build trust. Certainly does not build trust. There's another incident that happened sometime when there was a policeman who, in Calabishi at the time, who clearly had committed some sort of grievous behavior. And as a leading person in the community, I decided to report it to the officer in charge at the Calabishi police station. To my surprise, the younger policeman at the time came to me and let me have what was coming to me. And subsequently, for months and years after, whenever that young policeman would see me in the presence of other policemen, he would hurl the worst insults at me. And I had a very dangerous situation in my life where you're talking about trust in 28th of October 2019, where I was driving from Calabishi to Roseau. And a vehicle almost ran me off the road in chasing me down. And when I found out it was a police vehicle, the policeman came out and said, "Hello, Mr. Joseph," and proceeded to search my vehicle like as if I was some sort of drug dealer. So I had to take that case up, not locally. I did my local investigations, but I sent the necessary information to my sister in England and one in the United States, and I informed them accordingly of what had happened. And I made my international reports on that situation. Later to find out 6 months later that that particular policeman seemed to have been a good friend of the Commissioner of Police. Now, how does one build trust in situations like that, especially the latter, when you clearly knew who I was and you decided, and I'm absolutely certain that that was some form of political intimidation, that was some form of political harassment. Now, when the police doesn't know their boundaries in terms of confidentiality and secrecy and respect of persons, and clearly targeting individuals to intimidate them, to make them feel persecuted, or to let them feel insecure, how does that build rapport with the police? The second incident I raised, I was a leader in Calamishi, and when somebody brought a situation to me as a mediator, I chose to bring it to the officer in charge of the Calamishi police station. How that was handled led to me being intimidated and harassed by that policeman for years after. And so how do these things create a foundation whereby decent, loving, law-abiding citizens feel intimidated and threatened by, you could say, rogue policemen or policemen who seem to be used by the powers that be to harass and intimidate law-abiding citizens? We have to address those things, because in the end of the day, the police have to realize that they need the citizenry on their side. They need law-abiding citizens on their side. They need people who respect law and order on their side. They need leaders in the community to work along with them to ensure that their life is easier, their work is easier, that they gain the support of the community in the execution of their duties. And I brought that up based on what, again, Michael just said, because all these things you see create a scenario where you will have a widening gulf and a gap between the police and the wider society. The police need to realize that you walk hand in hand with the citizenry who will assist you and support you in the execution of your duties to protect and serve. And coincidentally, Dr. Andre, the commissioner who was investigated for drugs subsequently was made acting president of Dominica not too long ago. What standard are we setting? What is our standard bearer in our community and as a society? Who in their right mind would appoint a former commissioner with questions over his head to act as commissioner in the absence of the executive? So those things create anomalies and doubts in the minds of people about the integrity of the justice system, the judiciary, the executive in Dominica.
Yes, yes, Dr. Saint-Jean, I wanted to bring you in because I don't know how much of our earlier conversation that you were able to listen to. I know you were in a class, so you were engaged there. So, but you've heard some of it since you came on. But let's talk about some solutions, because I know you're on a whole different area now in peaceology. Give us your perspective on how we can find a solution to deal with that situation, bearing in mind all of what you've heard here tonight.
Well, I have explained that there needs to be, Irving, turn off your mic because the book is making noise. I've explained that at this phase in our history, when there have been so many studies, there have been so many interventions, the streets and the police work have benefited from work like David Michael, who, as a police officer, as awareness of community policing, as an intelligence officer, as a community person, persons like Mr. Andre, Principal Simeon Joseph, and so on. And the challenge that we have is a challenge from the neck up. We need to outsmart this thing. We can't outshoot it. We can't outfund it. We can't do any of that. And if we keep doing the same things that we've always done, we will keep getting the same results. I have said, and I don't know if David Michael agrees with me or not, that the window for community policing in Dominica is currently closed. What we need in Dominica, community policing, which I wrote a book on this. We did the work from 1996, and there's a lot of preparatory work. Community policing has become perverse and moved from what its intentions have been in order for it to function. We have reverted to a pre-1996 model. When we were there in 1996, we did a lot of groundwork, including the current police chief, who was on the ground in Granby with us, and many of them have gone on to retire then. What we need now is police policing. Good police policing as a precursor to community policing. Because what we are doing is the more that we keep messing around and making community policing, the term, be just a buzzword for political actors to pretend as if they're doing something serious about crime, it is more that they're going to dismantle the capacity of community policing to work with its integrity. And as we continue to speak, what Simeon Albert just spoke about on October 20th, 2019, that he experienced is empirical evidence of what I am talking about. When this thing has not been done right and has not been done right for a while, it's going to perverse its ability to function, and then it has to be replaced with something that does not have the shadow of doubt that it has had. I cannot speak for David Michael, but I have reasons to believe that this type of support, forget about COVID-19 and any other challenges that Mr. Michael may have had himself, those things are inevitable. But for the time when he was in Dominica working, I have convincing evidence to believe that the type of support that he needed, he didn't even get a fraction of it, as he should have gotten. I'm not talking about whether they paid his salary. They should pay him his salary because it's his contract. I'm talking about the things he asked and the things he needed to do the work in a timely manner. The same was the case with Mr. Irish. That went on, and the resources that he needed to do the work were not in keeping with the way that those mandates are. So we have to stop. We have to put a pause on community policing, because the necessary infrastructure for it to work as a strategy has been perverse for so long that we need to drain the swamp, not to quote a famous unliked person, right? So what I'm saying now is what we need. We need to, we need to rewire our brains, because currently we are wired in kind of a binary way of thinking. You are Republican, you're Democrat, you're Labor, you are UWP, you are gay or you are not, you're this, you're that. We need to have more of a quantum way of thinking. One of the problems that we're having now is that it is very difficult for people to realize that two or more things that appear to be contradictory could actually be correct at the same time. So for me to be right, you have to be wrong. And there is no place for your rightness and my rightness to be together when we come from opposite angles. That's why I like Mr. G. Sometimes, you try to get different voices. Although I have told you, I refuse to be on the show with some of my friends because I don't want to argue just to argue. I want us to discuss things to the point where we can have some action. So when we talk about solutions, this is why that's why I created Peaceology. And this is why we talk about Peaceology policing. The idea of Peaceology is that most human beings strive to optimize the quality of their life. And environmentally, economically, politically, physiologically, socially, spiritually, and so on. And when we, as ourselves, each individual person has a responsibility to maximize the quality of life that she or he can live and extend that to other people. We understand. and we have to create economy and industry, or wrong doing good. We spend so much time learning about how we fail, but we know very little about how we succeed. We need to outsmart this thing. We spend so much time wired looking at the things that we do not have. And yet it's the things that we have that will lead to determine our promise. We need to rewire our thinking, because when we constantly respond to the bad things that are happening and not building on the good that we can do, we allow those who capitalize on our misery and our excitement and our discontent to continue to have their hands in the cookie jar while we are asleep, or too stressed or too depressed for even finish school, or to even finish our garden and whatever we have to do and enjoy life. So what I suggest, and again, this is a new avenue for me because the world needs it. Chicago and other places, I have published some on it. We are doing some of the movements here. Dr. Michael couldn't, Michael Fletcher couldn't join me because he has some other things to do. But I really propose the building of peaceology, which takes on all of the advantages of sociology, criminology, biology, and those types of things, but also implements the shortcomings that those sciences have. I'll say lastly, sociology is a scientific study of interactions and relations among humans. Criminology is the scientific study of causes, consequences, potential solutions of crime. What we have with most of those ologies is that we have a lot of ideas of things ought to be, but we do not have implicit in those epistemologies themselves action agendas to be able to obtain desired results. That is the value added of peaceology. It is not just a paradigm shift, it's a paradigm upgrade. The scientific study, the science and practice of optimal quality of life. So sometime we can talk some more, but that is what really my solution is, because we have to outsmart this thing, because all of the things that we see that are going on, all of the solutions that we are working, that we are dealing with, they are working, but we need more. So we need to be thinking of asking, why are things not even worse? And the things that have been working, that we are tempted sometimes to pay attention away from because we are so busy chasing ambulances, we are not learning enough about how we succeed. We are focusing too much on how we fail.
And thank you, Dr. Peter Saint-Jean. I wanted to just alert us that, we more or less used up all of our time.
Sorry.
We've kind of used up our time. So I want to just go around and take some closing comments. I will go first to Dr. David Michael, if he's with us. Are you with us, Dr. Michaels? And if he's, bring him up. Let's hear him make some final remarks.
Yes. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for arranging the program tonight and the proposed follow-up. And the only thing is, the next time I would like to hear more from the general public, and perhaps the panel we can curtail what we have to say and just get many more calls in so we can have that interaction. But thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for all the other panelists for your worthy contributions. And I hope the general public listening can take some encouragement from what they've heard and play their part. And I hope those police officers and others in the criminal justice service at all levels can also give some serious consideration to what has been said tonight. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Dr. Michaels. Simeon, I know you have a few things to say. I'll take your closing remarks now. You might want to turn on your mic, though. Your mic is off.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Thought I put it on. I would want to close by saying two things. I believe in maximizing the potential of people. And we have to, as a country, as a society, see how we can find ways to allow not only our youth, but our population at large to be able to be more positive and to see how we can lean away from a lot of the negativity that has infiltrated our Dominican society. And so if we have to look at crime and violence, the question I would ask is whether crime and violence, okay? And so, because we need to understand that whenever psychological and emotional security is not experienced, the human being feels inhibited to express creativity. And creativity is what brings life. You know, creativity is what allows one to be on a positive level. And that is a normal part of what it means to be human. Human beings need to be creative. They need to harness and divert and channel all their energies into creating life. Life in all its forms, not only giving human birth, but using the inner stretch of their resources for positivity. Okay? And one of the things we need to realize is where this creativity is not reinforced in an environment of psychological and emotional security, the person experiences inner violation, which he or she feels is contrary to their existence. And herein, the person feels destroyed and incomplete and will therefore rebel against a false sense of being. So the rebellion of one who has very little or no sense of psychological and emotional security will result in the violation of oneself, one's neighbors, and one's environment. And so I would want to say that what we need to look at is to see how we can steer our society and our populations away from where individuals feel that they are left to express creativity by way of violating the self, the neighbor, and the environment. And this is largely due to the internalizing of their unconscious events that never communicate positive messages. So this is where we have to lead at. How do we communicate? How do we allow people to internalize their creativity, to feel psychologically and emotionally secure, so that the positive energies can flow in all its forms? And that goes from the top to the bottom, because I believe it is insecurity and emotional instability that allows even persons at the very top in the political sphere, in the judicial sphere, and as particularly among our policemen, because I find our policemen are becoming more and more inhumane. And I'm glad Michael spoke about those camouflage walking the streets of Roseau. When people approach policemen or policemen, they must never be seen as a threat to each other. Policemen are our brothers and sisters. The lawyers and the judges in the legal system are supposed to be our support systems to help us to feel secure. So we need to ensure that all these people feel psychologically and emotionally secure so that they can divest their energies into the right directions for the good of us all. That's how I want to close this evening.
Yes, and a good close too, because you're actually embracing some of what was said by Dr. Michael and some of those said, in fact, by Dr. Peter Saint-Jean, because what I see you saying, Simeon, to me, makes a lot of sense. We need to create that enabling environment which will allow every one of us to be able to self-actualize and be the best that we can be and accomplish the most that we can accomplish. Remove all this thing about poverty and mendicancy. Use the natural and man-made resources that we have, the God-given resources, and let's elevate all of our people. Let's bring people together. Stop wasting time, everybody backbiting and say I'm red or I'm blue and this and that. Why not spend time self-actualization, realize all the gifts that you have, that you've been given, given the opportunity to do that. I think that's what we need to do, and that's why we always say when we have these discussions, We don't have any divisiveness or malice, no, mauvais langue and backbiting and calling people's names. And I'm hoping that the people who are listening to us, like the police and like the policymakers and like all the people, the young people, all the people in every rung of society, they take away from it what we hope they will take away. We're not there to criticize we're here to just help to see how we can bring everybody together to make it better for every one of us. Dr. Andre, I give you the final word as usual.
All right. Okay. Let me say thank you to your listeners. Thank you to the panelists and their fantastic contributions. Thank you, Mr. G, Mr. Lambie. And I thank one and all. This is a very important issue to be discussed, quite frankly. The whole question as to the rising crime and violence. This is not just a perception. It is clearly a reality. There's one thing we can't do. We can't jail our way out of this problem. We can't simply incarcerate those who are charged with significant offenses, because quite frankly, that doesn't address the fundamental and underlying problems. We have to adopt a holistic approach to this question of crime and violence. We have to ask ourselves, what are the factors that engender antisocial behavior? Is it individual pathology? Is it that there's just a few bad apples? Is it that the people who are just bad? Or is it the influence of perverse factors in the community, imported perhaps by persons in positions of authority that are basically taking advantage of those lesser beings, the low-lying fruit of the criminal justice system, as it were, and causing this perpetual stream of problems? Have we deviated from our value system? If we have, why have we done so? What is the type of culture of leadership that we engender in our society? Do we engender a culture where you live on each other as opposed to with each other? Do you engender a culture where it becomes a dog-eat-dog society? Do you engender a culture where success is defined by the basis of the size of the house that you live in, by the quality of the watch that you wear, and by the brand of clothing that you buy? Is success measured by the fact that you can cheat your way into perpetual leadership positions? Sometimes, the last time I was in Dominica, good, well-intentioned person said, well, Doc, the laws are just being used creatively in terms of elections. Is that the euphemism that we're going to use to cover up wrongdoing in the political process? Creativity. No, call a spade a spade. You cannot resort to deviant means to gain things which really don't belong to you. After all, that is the core of beliefs that we have been nurtured on. Why have we not, or why have we deviated, or why have we placed less significance on those core values? Why is it that the church perhaps does not have the sway that it had before in terms of curbing and in terms of instilling values in our community? What approaches can we come up with? What do we have to gain back, or what do we have to farm? And when I say farm, I'm speaking metaphorically. Do we have to dig deep in our collective beings? Do we have to embrace the philosophy and the approach envisioned by Dr. Saint-Jean? If not, then why not? What is keeping us back from taking our rightful place in this community of nations, where the values of thrift, industry, respect, integrity are the governing factors in the community? And that is hopefully what we can work to build on, or build towards. Because if we have those values, we wouldn't be talking about perversions of the justice system. We wouldn't be talking about uneven policing. We wouldn't be talking about persons who will help themselves to your property. We wouldn't be talking about persons who try to deprive you of your rights cynically based on political considerations. We have a duty to try to revert to those old values that sustained us. the old philosophies of persons such as E.O. Leblanc and other important leaders, not only in the political sphere, but in the social sphere, in the religious sphere. We have a duty to embrace those values, because in them, in the embracement of those values, lies our collective salvation. So I say good night to you, and I say good night to your listeners.
And thank you so much, Dr. Andre. Let me just wrap up by saying this, that I think I like the idea behind the Peaceology move, because it seems to me it embraces all of the values that we and we used to have those values in Dominica. For some reason, they fallen by the wayside. We don't know where they are now. They seem to be gone. They've been replaced by CO and all kind of things, little things that are, expedient, and just to get, a quick dollar so quickly we can buy the most expensive shirt or pants or shoes. This seemed to be the value, but there used to be good values. A time when people used to cook extra food just in case somebody passed up by who was hungry, who didn't have a meal, or families used to do that. A time when the community used to take care of the child. You go out there and somebody who's a friend of your parents see you doing something wrong, they pull you up, when they take you in, and your parents, it took a village. We need to go back to those values. And I get a sense that all of that is encompassed in what Dr. St. Jean is saying in terms of the Peaceology movement. So, gentlemen, I just want to thank everybody, Dr. St. Jean, Dr. Michael, Dr. Andre, Simeon, whose technology didn't work, but it shut down on him. So he's very happy to have had Simeon with us tonight. Thank you, Lambi. Thank you, Sherwin. Great job. I want to thank all those folks who listened to us. Many of the people who did not get to call. I mean, we had some very good calls tonight, Dr. Andre and everybody. I must say, very valuable contributions from our callers. And then, of course, there are so many people who were with us on Facebook. We didn't even get a chance to acknowledge them, but I want to do that now. We appreciate you. We embrace you. We were happy to have you there. Some of your comments were great. We didn't get a chance to read them. But that is what happens when, you're a little fella like me who have so many bright fellas around you. They bamboozle you, so you don't even get a chance to pick out your people on Facebook. But anyway, gentlemen, good night, everybody. And see you next time. All right.
Okay.
Everybody, thanks, Lambi.
Simeon, Dr. Michael Lambi, Mr. G.
Thanks for following up.
All right,
have a great night. Yes.
All right, Obi. Take care.
Oh, my goodness. Oh.